What's up, everybody? Welcome to PSI Love You XOXO episode 26. I'm one of your hosts, Greg Miller, alongside the OK Beast, blessing Adeoye Jr.
It's me. I got a new camera.
Yes. Now, okay, real quick. Yes, you have a brand new camera. So do I.
Yeah.
But your camera is going to switch back to your old shitty camera at some point because...
Yeah. Probably somewhere between the next 30 minutes and the next 2 hours, it's gonna die. I don't know when. I can't see my battery meter, so I have no idea when it's gonna die. But at some point, it's gonna die, and I'm gonna switch back to my old crappy camera.
So to be clear, Kevin brought you this nice camera, but didn't bring you a power source for it.
Nope.
Well, to be fair, I already own this camera. The camera, the camera technically isn't new. He did bring me a cam link, and he is gonna bring me a power source on Wednesday, probably.
Okay.
And so he basically helped me just get my camera set up to be able to actually stream it and actually work for all of what we're doing. But yeah, I'm still waiting on the power source. And instead of just waiting until Wednesday to actually make this my default setup,
you gotta live dangerously.
I just love how it looks. Like, look at this. Like, look how better my room looks just with the better resolution. Sure,
yeah. There's more textures to it now. There's more.
Yeah, exactly. It looks like it's actually loaded in.
And then, for the rare PS I Love You XOXO guest, it is IGN's own Janet Garcia. Hello, Janet.
What's good? Glad to be here.
Thank you for coming in. No, of course. I've said it multiple times, and I've told you privately, but I've said it on shows, and I've said it on Twitter. You are the funniest person at IGN. You are the most entertaining IGN personality to follow on Twitter. You are hilarious. You put people on blast, and you have great opinions on games. We're happy to have you.
Oh, I really appreciate that. Happy to be here.
If people aren't familiar with you, how do you describe yourself? What's the quick elevator pitch of Janet Garcia?
Associate guides editor at IGN, which means I do guides things at IGN. And outside of that, I also run my own blog on the side called Game Industry Guides, where I try to field questions from people in or trying to break into the industry and put the answers out on the internet. And then I think that's mainly the games content side of like what I do.
That's awesome. And so, yeah, you were one of the people working on Last of Us Part 2 guide, correct?
Yes.
It was you and this Brendain fellow. Never heard of him.
Graber. Yeah.
Never heard of him.
He's a mysterious fellow, but it was me and Brendain. Just for a while, it was just me, which was a lonesome time. But yeah. Brendain joined me, which was great. He did a lot of the collectible work. He made some awesome breakout pages, excellent guides writer. And of course, any project, even if it's led by just two people, is always touched a little bit by other people on staff. So everyone playing The Last of Us who, tossed a tip our way or one collectible here and there. Felicia Miranda, who is our SEO editor, did like some work on the guides. So definitely a few other people involved, but it was mainly a me and Brendain collab, and it was an experience. It's over. It's there. Thank you guys to people who have used it. Several people have tweeted or DM'd me. I always appreciate when people use our content. People have given feedback. I'll fix anything that needs to be fixed. Interlinking stuff. Like my favorite thing about guides is that it is just there to help people. I love talking about my opinions, but you guys know that can be contentious on the internet, and doing a guide that just helps people get through a game or enjoy a game or platinum a game feels really good to just be part of a positive experience for them. And it's like, hell yeah, I'm glad that you turned to us and that you used us when there's so much content on the internet. That means so much to me. So I love doing guides for that reason. It's really fun.
I, of course, used you guys for it because I had to DM Brendain and have him tell me where the final collectibles were I needed in Last of Us Part 2. We're going to talk about Last of Us Part 2. Obviously, if you need a guide to use for it, you need to go to kindafunny.com/IGNTLOU2. That's TLU2. As part of my agreement with the IGN's guide team for getting embargoed information early, I'm out here totally selling it for them. But Janet, I guess the question would be, I haven't talked to anyone at IGN Guides in a long time about their job, right? Because obviously I worked there a while ago and things obviously change. But even that said, I think so many of our listeners don't understand what a guides writer in 2020 is and how that works at IGN now. For The Last of Us Part 2, what is the process? How does that work for you?
Well, initially, like I said, I was on my own for the project, so I was in charge of doing everything myself. So that was kind of a rare circumstance. A lot of times we do have multiple people on it, but I was the project lead. So what that means is I am in charge of creating a content plan for what stuff we will publish when the embargo lifts. So the walkthrough, collectibles page, maybe tips and tricks is always a classic one we do. For this, I knew, okay, safe codes and combos. Everyone's going to be looking that up, want to know that. We'll put that on a page. other breakout pages. I'm trying to remember combat tips, like which actually Mark Medina led that up for us. So shout out to Mark for doing that and doing the video content on that. And then thinking about if there's any other trophy guide and list is a really big one for a game like this. So coming up with that plan, being able to anticipate what people would be looking for and how to format it to help them find that information, and then actually making all the information. So when you do a walkthrough for a game, there's a couple ways to go about it. I think everyone does it a little differently. For me, I am still experimenting with what format I use, and I think every game is different because games are so diverse. But for a game like this, it was a combination of sort of for a sec. At first, I did the walkthrough while playing the game. So I would literally be playing it, and then I'm like, then you turn to the left. You'll see a grocery store. Enter. Inside the grocery store, you'll find several clickers. Consider using this one thing you just learned. Afterwards, go straight into the right. You'll see a crevice. Dina's waiting for you outside in the winter. Like, I have parts of this game like totally memorized in a really weird way. And then I'd write that down and take screenshots and keep moving through. To speed it up, at one point I did just go through the game, still playing kind of slowly to find collectibles and mark them as I found them. And then I'd rewatch my footage at 300x speed while making notes on what you had to do. And so that was my experience with the game. So it's
Does making a guide ruin the game for you? Like, is it possible to have fun where you play for 5 minutes and then sit there and write it all down and then go back to playing?
Yes. And that's why I think a lot of times I will do capture and then record after, just because it also helps you feel the flow of a game. And there's some games too where the combat might get so intense that you can't just, you have to get through it and then take notes on the combat afterwards. You can still enjoy a game that you wrote a guide for. I do think that, and I talk to my coworkers about this a lot on the guides team, I think that playing a game that you write a guide for amplifies the flaws and also the pros of the game, because you spend so much time looking at it and writing it and thinking about it that you really notice that, like, wow, there's a lot of dumpsters in The Last of Us 2, and I think anyone playing would notice that. But when you're like, okay, on the right, there's a dumpster, like, you can just notice it even more. And I do think that writing a guide sometimes can increase your love and feeling for a game, though, because you spend so much time living in the world that if you do end up liking it, you just get to know it on a level that feels like so much more intimate than what another player would experience, because no one else has really sat and thought and stared and like taken all these screenshots and these different angles. It's definitely a different relationship than you would normally have with the game.
Yeah, I can't imagine doing it, let alone, I feel in some regard, and tell me if I'm wrong, I would imagine doing a guide for a game as a game unto itself. There's the, when we get games for review, there's always the embargo, and you're always trying to meet embargo. So just to have it beat usually is one thing, right? Of going through and having it beaten and be able to talk about it comprehensively, let alone to try to have everything, let alone to be working with other people about assembling, let alone then I assume SEO is a big part of it. Of you're playing and you're like, what am I getting stuck on? You're like, safe codes are going to be a big deal. I know I need to make a headline for that. Like, is that accurate? You think that it becomes a game itself?
Yeah, it's definitely, I think there's a game element to it. I think it's also just like this massive weird project where you're like, it's just a weird side of games coverage, because it's not an opinion and you're not making the game either. You're like staring very heavily at what was made, which is, it's like a different form of analysis in that sense. And then by extension, so when Brendain joined, I was like, okay, cool, collectible help. Like, I could, because the walkthrough takes so long to write that I'm like, I could really use some help on collectibles. And Brendain is amazing at collectibles. He's been a guides writer for a really long time. He is the best guides writer I've ever met by a mile. He's just fantastic to work with. So I'm like, Brendan's here, we're gonna be okay, because like he's very talented. So whenever we have more people on the team too, if you're the project lead, you kind of assign things. Obviously, it's still collaborative. Like, you can talk to, suggest things to the project manager, but essentially, like, you're in charge of making sure that we have a plan in place so that when the embargo lifts, we are publishing whatever needs to be published. And sometimes that's all of it. Sometimes it's not all of it, because math, you don't have enough time always to do it. But just having a plan in place to track it, check trends. It is definitely crushing when you have something up maybe before everyone else, but you're not ranking as well. But that's you do the best you can, and that's all you can really ask for from yourself. So we have great SEO editors and teams to try to help bring our work to light. But I'm like, hey, I made the thing. It's there. We can reformat it if we need to, but it's there already.
Well, yeah, everybody use this one, kindoffunny.com/IGNTLOU2. You can get the entire guide. Janet and Brendan, the whole team at IGN has been working on. Thank you, of course, for coming here, Janet, because, of course, we started talking about Last of Us on the old internet, and then we're like, well, we could just do that. And if you didn't know, ladies and gentlemen, that's what today's episode is. We're not into spoilers yet. We're going to give you a little bit of news before we get there. But the idea is that, obviously, I think The Last of Us Part 2 is a game that warrants all kind of discussions, which is why we've done so far a Last of Us Part 2 review as a Gamescast. We've done a spoiler cast as a Gamescast. We then did another spoiler cast, this time with Neil, Ashley, and Troy. Then we did a We Have Cool Friends with Laura Bailey. Now Shannon Woodward on Twitter wants to get involved. We'll see what happens there. But mainly it's this conversation of having someone to talk to about The Last of Us Part 2. And I think, honestly, this is going to be a long time, or this is going to be going on for a long time, that we have these conversations over and over again. But I knew so many of you beating The Last of Us would have things to say, whether it be reviews, questions, theories. We told you to write in for this episode, and it will be yet another spoiler cast. I don't know, Blessing, we got to come up with a better name than spoiler cast, because it's getting
because this would be our fourth spoiler cast at this point.
Third in a row, fourth in a row. You can't do that. So we got to figure that out. But by the end of this episode, we'll hopefully have a name for it. But we're going to get into all of that with you, because this is PS I Love You XOXO. Each and every Tuesday morning at 6 a.m. Pacific time, we put up a brand new episode of your PlayStation podcast. If you like that, you should go to patreon.com/kindoffunnygames, where you can support our work. You can get the show ad-free, and you can ask your questions. You can also get the exclusive post show we put up there for just a few bucks. However, if you have no bucks to toss our way, you can get each and every show for free. youtube.com/kindoffunnygames. Please subscribe. And podcast services around the globe each and every Tuesday morning. Of course, there are ads, and there's no post show, and you're supporting us, just not in the monetary way. But if you can't, I understand, it's no big deal. But if you could, it means a lot. You, though, should be like our Patreon producers: Mohammed, aka Momo, Connor Nolan, aka Connor Dowell, James Hastings, Sancho West Gaming, Julian the Gluten-Free Gamer, Delaney Twinning, Aaron Bonilla, Jeffrey Long, and Jesus Barrio, aka Bentfork_PR. They, of course, go to patreon.com/kindoffunnygames, get the show ad-free, help us out, and get their names read on the show just like you can. A little bit of housekeeping for you. Tomorrow is Dreams Calm, basically the game Dreams convention. I say tomorrow because we record on Monday. If you're watching on Tuesday, it's probably about to happen. 9 a.m. You can come watch it with Blessing and me. Twitch.tv/kindoffunnygames. If you missed it live, youtube.com/kindoffunnygames. We'll put up our live reactions after over there. Speaking of youtube.com/kindoffunnygames, that's the sponsor this week, youtube.com/kindoffunnygames. But I'll tell you about that later. For now, let's begin the show with what is and forever will be this week's X's and O's. Now, Blessing,
Gregory,
this is a weird episode. It's not, you know what I mean? It's not like a traditional, we're running through doing the news and stuff, right? We're just here to talk about what everybody thought of Last of Us Part 2. However, you put on here some related Last of Us 2 stories. Do you want to read those before we get into this actual spoilery discussion of everything else?
Yeah, so before we actually get into the spoiler discussion, there are two Last of Us 2 related news stories to bring up as sort of small PlayStation updates for this episode. Number one being The Last of Us Part 2 is the fastest selling PS4 first party game. This is something we talked a lot about last episode. This is Brendain Sinclair at gamesindustry.biz, who says The Last of Us Part 2 sold through more than 4 million copies in its first 3 days on sale. Sony announced today, and today being, I believe, Friday when this article.
Yeah, that sounds right.
Yeah, that makes the Naughty Dog sequel the fastest selling first-party PS4 exclusive game to date, topping previous holders of that title, God of War with 3.1 million sold in 3 days, and Spider-Man with 3.3 million in 3 days. Over the weekend, it also claimed the title of Sony's fastest selling PS4 game in the UK, although that distinction was wrested from 2016's Uncharted 4. And Greg, we talked a lot last week about, is The Last of Us Part 2
Spider-Man?
Well, yeah, we talked about could it outsell Spider-Man. We also talked about is The Last of Us Part 2 the most successful PS4 game? And in terms of fastest selling, it's reached that height.
Sure.
And so congratulations on that part. Do we think it's going to beat Spider-Man in the long run?
Yeah. Right.
So.
Yeah, I mean, I think these numbers are so crazy to think of, right? Because you said when we talked about it before, Daniel Amott on Twitter on Friday said, for reference, Uncharted 4 sold 2.7 million in 3 days. Horizon sold 2.6 million in 14 days. God of War sold 3.1 million in 3 days, and Spider-Man sold 3.3 million in 3 days. Granted, it's been 2 years, so there's more PlayStation 4s on the market, but still, to go from 3.3 million to 4 million in 3 days, and that's just the tip of the iceberg on what we're seeing, let alone the legs this will have, let alone what happens when PlayStation 5 does release. And you assume there isn't a PlayStation 5 version. There's just the PS4 version that's running better, backwards compat and all that jazz. Like, I don't know. Janet, where do you think it's going to come down in terms of like how successful this will be?
Yeah, I think bringing up the PS5 here is really important because it's kind of history repeating itself with the first Last of Us, where it came out and then it's like on so many lists for best PS4 games is the first Last of Us, and I imagine PS5 will be no different, despite the fact that it's not really a PS4 game and it's not really a PS5 game, like, those two respectively, but they're so amazing that people can't help but recommend it because it's usually the best version or the better looking version. Yeah, it's hard to, just based on trends, usually it's not like those numbers ever tend to sway in the other direction. So just based on the fact that it came out so strong out the gate, I do think, and I know you guys discussed this on your last episode, but it is wild that something like The Last of Us can be more popular than God of War. It's like, who's cooler than Kratos? Joel and Ellie. It's like, it just seems kind of odd because they're just, I absolutely love The Last of Us and The Last of Us Part 2, but you would think that the other ones just feel more exciting. And I just think it's really amazing and somewhat surprising, but also maybe it shouldn't be that surprising that a game that is known for its story is so successful. And I just really hope this opens up people's perspectives to narrative driven games and narrative experiences, because I'm like, some people still don't really consider narrative games to be a big deal genre or worth their attention, but I'm like, hey, if you like Last of Us and Last of Us Part 2, I have bad news for you. You like narrative games, and like,
100%.
Play a bunch of other ones because it's a fantastic genre. Obviously it blends in action very heavily, of course, but like, I just think it's really cool for a game that feels unique in a lot of ways to be so successful, and it just kind of opens the doors for new ideas and new IPs and new things to come out that are equally risky in some senses or blending genres.
So, Janet, to put on your hat and be a philosopher for a second, the question last week, right, was, do we think that Last of Us Part 2 will be the most successful PlayStation game? And I immediately jumped to sales, brought up the thing. We talked about, Grand Theft Auto, which is cheating, and then God of War, and, then Spider-Man. And then Blessing, I think halfway through that conversation was like, I don't even know if successful means sales, Greg. And I was like, oh, that's a great point of like, what are we defining as success? Do you think when all is said and done, Last of Us Part 2 is the most successful PlayStation 4 game, however you define that?
The way I define it, yes, because I would say success is making something that's just absolutely fantastic. I think The Last of Us Part 2 is one of the best games I've ever played in my life. It's hard to imagine what other games will be kind of in that layer for me, just historically speaking. If we're thinking success in terms of, I guess, most people thinking it's like kind of unanimously awesome, I would say no, because I think games like God of War and even Spider-Man to a degree, even though the reviews there are like kind of range usually between like 8 and 10, depending on the outlet and the reviewer, I feel like the conversations around God of War and Spider-Man were holistically positive, while The Last of Us 2 is a little bit more divisive. And I'm not even talking about like the, dark areas of the internet and forums. I even just mean among critics. Like some people, even though they might still rate it pretty well, I think there are some people that the story really resonated and some people that thought it was a little bit one note thematically. So I think in terms of that, no, but in terms of being the best, yes, in my opinion.
Yeah. Blessing, where do you come down a week later? And it's worth pointing out, too, for our conversation here, that at 4 million, according to Wikipedia, Last of Us Part 2 is already the top 10. It is the number 10 on the top 10 of best-selling.
Which is wild. Yeah, I was
period.
listening to the KFGD where you guys talked about that, and I like when you guys mentioned, I was like, certainly that can't be real. Certainly that's a mistake.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's awesome.
Monster Hunter World is right in front at 4.67 million, and I have to imagine Last of Us is already past that. They just haven't updated the numbers.
Yeah. 4 million as a number is wild, right? Like them being able to one up Spider-Man by that much, I thought was very surprising. And so again, good on them. In terms of where I'm at a week later, in terms of the most successful PS4 game conversation, I think for me personally, it is a toss up between God of War and The Last of Us Part 2. And the more and more I talk about The Last of Us Part 2, the more and more it grows on me, and the more I find reasons to love it, and the more I'm like, all right, yeah, like this game is doing things that I didn't realize, and now that I'm talking to more people about it, it is like my mind is being open to details I didn't even realize about it. And so where it kind of nets out in the end, I still don't know. I think a lot of that is to the power of this generation for PS4. I think 5 years from now, looking back on the PS4, there are going to be multiple games you can point back to and be like, oh yeah, that was the highlight of this generation, right? Like you can point back to God of War and be like, that was the highlight. Or you can point back to Horizon Zero Dawn for many people and they'll be like, yeah, that was the highlight. Or same with Persona, or same with Final Fantasy VII Remake. There are so many games. This generation is specific. Predator Hunting Grounds, yes, of course. There's so many games this generation that I think just for even the PlayStation audience alone, shown very bright. Like there's so many games that actually came out and made a statement and felt definitively amazing for so many people. And to what Janet was saying earlier, I think the divisiveness might hold back Last of Us Part 2 a bit in terms of it being the overarching number one most successful PlayStation game in that overarching conversation. But I mean, I do think for so many people, this game is gonna be that number one. And I'm curious to see how that plays out. Like, I'm curious to see if you polled people based on what's your favorite PlayStation 4 game. I'm curious to see where those numbers would stack up specifically between Last of Us Part 2 and God of War. Because we see a lot of hate for Last of Us Part 2, but there is also a lot of love, and I wonder how much that love outweighs love for other games, if that makes sense.
That's what's so interesting, and I think it's expected, right? The further we get away from launch, so the more people have played it, the more I don't see the hate as much anymore. Where it was so, on release date, so universally like, fuck this game, and I can't believe they did this, and they don't understand, and and let's all go troll Laura, and let's do this, and yada yada. Like, the further and further we get from it, seems the more and more it is just like, no, this game's incredible. And I think I go back to what we were talking about last week for me personally. Like, I do think this is going to come down as the most successful PlayStation 4 game, and I think it'll be the one that defines this platform in this generation. But it's more of the fact that, I don't know, will it beat Uncharted? You know what I mean? Will it come in behind GTA? Probably, yeah. But like, beyond that, I think it's the fact that we're going to talk about this game for a decade. Like, this game is one of those games that is, once again, I think, showing us what the future of games can be, and maybe should be, in a lot of ways, of like, we're going to have these ongoing discussions, and the games can make you feel this way. And I know we're going to get into this in a little bit with reviews and conversations and what the best friends have written in about, but like, you can not like this game, you can not enjoy this experience and still think it's amazing because it made you feel something and it had something to say.
Here's a kind of related question. What would you guys say is the most successful PS3 game? Not in sales, but in terms of like, when you think PS3, like the cream of the crop, what game is that?
For me, it's The Last of Us.
I was gonna say, right?
How crazy is that can even be like that no, it's now a franchise. It's like best PS3 game, Last of Us, best PS4 game, also Last of Us. Like, I think that also just speaks to like the power of that franchise in, I think, just staying with people in a way that other games might not, specifically because of the way the story plays out.
Yeah, and it's like one of those, not to take away from anybody else in PlayStation Studios, first party, but like, you look at PS3, and I think that is a generation, when you think of PlayStation, that is defined by Naughty Dog and their rise from being a great developer to being the greatest developer working in video games today. And the fact that they just went from, obviously having successes with Jack and stuff and Crash before and being a different company, but to see Uncharted to Uncharted 2 to Uncharted 3 to eventually obviously Uncharted 4, but Last of Us, like, you see them go in a way that I think every other video game developer, but main first party studios, definitely looked at and was like, holy shit, like, they are the pace car. They are what we all have to try to strive and chase and match now. And I think, we've talked about it before in the show, Bless, right? Of like, does PlayStation play it too safe with their first party studios? And I think it's a lot of them seeing it, where I think, you look at Guerrilla making Killzone, and they're making Killzone after Killzone, and they're good at it, and there's an audience, and they could do it forever and just be in that brown world, with the exception of Shadowfall. But you see PlayStation as a brand start to really pivot to being like, no, these Naughty Dog games are defining us. And I think there was probably a fire lit under their asses, under Sony Bend, under Sucker Punch, of all these people who were like, fuck, let's take it to another level. Let's do something like that. Like, let's try, not like do exactly what Naughty Dog does, but let's tell engaging let's tell engaging narratives maybe in a third person perspective. That
like
part
personal stories.
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
When you look at this generation, it feels like so many games from Sony were informed by The Last of Us and the success of The Last of Us, especially God of War. Like God of War, I think is the number one other Sony game that feels like it is a direct successor to what The Last of Us did, right? And that is from the perspective of, hey, yeah, let's have this more so behind the back camera angle, behind the shoulder camera angle, as opposed to the zoomed out focus that we got in all the other God of Wars. Also, let's have it be about this parent child relationship that builds throughout the course of the game. Oh yeah, let's have all these companion abilities and companion interactions and gameplay based around having multiple characters interact with each other. Let's have banter that goes on throughout the course of the gameplay, and it's stuff that feels very Naughty Dog, that affected the God of War franchise in a very, very positive way, to the point that God of War 2018 is so many people's favorite God of War for good reason, because that game is incredible. And so yeah, I think Last of Us for me is an easy game to point to in the PS3 generation because of that. And this generation, I feel like it's just more so just bigger in so many ways that it's still hard for me to point to one. I think the top 3 are probably going to be God of War, Last of Us Part 2, and Spider-Man, probably in rotation somewhere. And then, I'll hear any argument for Horizon Zero Dawn. I'll hear arguments for a lot of other exclusives. Persona 5 is a game I keep even forgetting to roll in there, because that is a Sony exclusive game, along with Final Fantasy VII Remake, which I also keep forgetting, and that's so far still my game of the year.
Still?
That game hit me hard, man. I love that game.
I was also involved in that guide, but I just did side quests. I didn't do the walkthrough.
That's probably the thing that might have held it back for you, because I skipped all the side quests, and that made that game way better.
We're right to do that. Then we do have a page on the best ones if people are interested. I can't be on a show without plugging the hell out of guides, but that's interesting.
But yeah, even with the PS3, I'm looking at other games, right? And I forgot that Metal Gear Solid 4: Guns of the Patriots came out, and of course you can make the argument for it. Uncharted 2: Among Thieves. I'm trying to scroll through this page that is like the top 10 PS4 or PS3 exclusives, and I'm seeing like Killzone and Infamous. Which,
but I think we're all
great,
you're all in video games, and I'm probably speaking out of turn, and I know there's a million of examples, but stick with me. In video games, I think we're all used to amazing games that we play and love and enjoy the systems of and understand what you're. But I think the reason The Last of Us hit so hard in the PS3 because like people cried doing that, and it wasn't like just the weird, you got choked up at something. It was like a weird shared emotion, and it was the game from the literally from the go tells you it's not your average video game, right? That it's going for something else here. And I know we've talked before of like, well, there's these zombie tropes in it, or there's this, that, and the other. All true, but like it still hit in a way most games didn't hit. And that's why, I've talked about it so much as we've talked about Last of Us Part 2 of, playing Last of Us Part 2, going back to Last of Us, and then coming back to Last of Us Part 2 again for my second playthrough. It was that weird thing of playing The Last of Us and having it feel like it was an old school traditional video game, because The Last of Us Part 2 had pushed everything so far and had evolved everything so far. And I think that with that said, it doesn't surprise me that when you think of the PlayStation 3's greatest success, and then you think of PlayStation 4, we're talking about the same franchise from the same developers, right? Because I think that they took risks in The Last of Us Part 1 that normal quote unquote video game makers wouldn't take, and found success with it, which then I think reinforced everything and made them more confident in themselves, made Sony more confident in them, and everybody was just like, all right, go tell this, which we're about to talk about in a second with spoilers on, go tell this story that most people wouldn't do, and put players in situations most players don't want to be in or wouldn't want to be in.
The next PlayStation update regarding The Last of Us Part 2. There are no plans for Last of Us DLC. This is from Liam Croft at Push Square. As part of the spoiler cast with Kinda Funny, they went on record stating that the team won't be doing any DLC for The Last of Us Part 2. Quote, there are no plans for DLC. A pretty definitive answer from the studio's vice president, so don't get your hopes up for anything in the near future. However, we do still have that multiplayer side project from Naughty Dog to look forward to, which I'm very much looking forward to, but at the same time, I'm like, does that game ever come out? That multiplayer project that I really want so badly.
I'll tell you what. I mean, for Liam from Push Square here sleeping on, because I asked Neil about that too during the spoiler cast and just got a mums of the word answer. So you could have had that in there too. I'm just saying, youtube.com/kindoffunnygames. Go watch that spoiler cast.
Do we feel like the Last of Us Part 2 is fine without DLC? Because I know this is a conversation that I feel like we had back when The Last of Us Part 1 came out. In the same conversation about, does this game really need a sequel? I think those conversations also exist as far as, does this game need DLC? Is there more to really express here when what we have feels so definitive? And I also want to give a shout out to the spoiler cast that I did with Janet and a group of people, Gene Park, Laura Kate Dale, Lucy O'Brien. We did a whole Natalie Flores, yes. We did a whole 3.5 hour drunk spoiler cast, which people should go check out. And I think that's on your YouTube channel,
on
right?
My YouTube, yeah. youtube.com/GameOnysus. It's GameOnysus. Same handle for myself. Yeah,
and it was a really fun episode. People should 100% check that out. But I believe the idea of DLC was brought up, to which we started throwing around ideas, and a couple of ones that I thought, oh, and I can't say spoilers, can I?
Not yet.
I'll wait till the spoilers section.
I mean, if you want, we can start right here.
Well, you had DLC. I mean, we could do either way, but you had DLC in mind, at least.
Yeah, I had DLC ideas. Yeah, and I don't think, like, I think they could have gotten away with doing DLC in a way that worked, in the same way that Left Behind worked so well. At the same time, I understand not wanting to do DLC for this game. I understand being like, no, this is definitive. We don't want to touch it. We feel like our time with this game is done. And I think it's a good move in the sense that you look at Uncharted 4, and I feel like when they announced Uncharted Lost Legacy, I personally had that a kind of a knee jerk, like, oh, but I thought this is the end. Like, you really want to add more despite this being the end? And then you learn it is more of a story about Chloe and Nadine and what they're doing. And it's like, okay, cool. I guess this is a side story, so it doesn't really affect what's going on with Nathan Drake. The Last of Us Part 2, for me, feels in a lot of ways bigger than Joel and Ellie's story, that I feel like even adding anything to that would feel like they're kind of stretching things along in a way that they don't need to. And so I'm totally down with them not doing DLC for this game. I don't know how you guys feel.
I'm down for it, but I'm not. I would have liked it. It kind of makes me sad that they're not doing it, just because I actually never played Left Behind. I did play the first game. I played the second. I'd never played Left Behind. I just didn't have time to get to it. And also, here's like a hot take.
It since you wait. So you have played it now, though, right? You've played it.
No,
now.
I still haven't played it.
Haven't.
No, I was like, no, we gotta do the second game. We're just gonna go. Like, it sounds awesome, cool. We're just gonna jump in. It's funny. We were like, it feels so much like, Left Behind, and I'm like, sure. I don't know. I didn't play it, so kind of a hot take. And there's nothing against people that like their DLC or like having DLC outside of games that maybe are like ongoing games, like how Animal Crossing gets updates now and Splatoon gets updates and stuff. Outside of those instances, I don't think any game needs DLC. I don't really like DLC. I feel like, no. I rolled the credits. You can't have me run it back. I'm gone. I probably deleted you off the PS4 already because I need the space. Like, I just don't. It's like a weird thing for me. I just don't like revisiting it. Like, I already finished it. We said goodbye. I'm done with the story. I guess you have more to say, but you should have put that in when I was there because I had played it. So that's just for me. I don't really feel like anything needs DLC. I think it can be nice and it can be done well and can be done poorly, but I don't feel it's needed. There are games where I enjoy the game enough that maybe I'll go back to it, but oftentimes I'm like, cool, more stuff. I'm off playing other games. That's just kind of my personal way I go about playing games.
No, personally, I don't think you're wrong at all. Like, there's when I sit there and talk about DLC that I think was awesome or affected me or whatever, like, there's tons of it, but I'm right there with you. Like, for me, it's always Horizon, where I was like, Horizon Zero Dawn, one of my favorite games of that, the generation of the year, whatever you want to say. And when Frozen Wilds dropped, right? That's right. Isn't that the name of it?
Sure.
I was like, all right, yeah, hell yeah. And I got it and popped in, and it was that thing of like, it just picks up right where the game left off, like wherever you are on your quest. So it was that of like, wait, what was I doing? And where are we going? And there wasn't like the narrative, like, here's catching you up on it. Here's what it was. It was meant to be played as if I was still playing the game, and I wasn't. And I feel like, the Spider-Man DLC, that was only, I think, what, a month after, maybe a month and a half after they dropped episode 1 after the game came out. And putting that back in, it was the same thing of like, wait, what the how do I, oh man, I've got so many moves now and I don't remember how to do certain things. I always liked The Last of Us being like, Left Behind being a like episodic, like here's this 2-hour thing you can jump in, play. I thought worked better than most. And I think that helped it resonate, that it was its own story. It was its own beginning and end. But like even Assassin's Creed Odyssey, where it's like so much stuff's come to that. And it's one of my favorite games. And I put, 100 some hours into it, but you jump back into it and it is that, where do I go to find it? And how does it start? And like, okay, who are you? Somebody's talking to me and I'm like, I remember you were important. It's like, yeah, we're with there. If it's not part of it, it does sometimes feel not even tacked on, but just such a hard shift to get back into.
Yeah, I'm there too. Like I can probably think of more examples of DLC that I tried and fell off of than DLC I actually truly grew to love. Like Left Behind is like the one example I can think of a DLC that I absolutely fell in love with. But then I have that Spider-Man one where I did episode 1 and was like, okay, that was great. Yeah, that was a really good experience. And then episode 2 came out and I played probably like an hour of it and was like, all right, cool, I'll come back to this, and just never turned it back on.
Yeah. And that was the thing, right? Sorry to cut you off, but like for Spider-Man in particular, like playing through that, like that ends with real ramifications on the characters from the game, right? And that I imagine is somehow will be brought up in, I don't know if it'll be in Miles, but definitely in 2 or whatever. And so it's like I needed to play that, I feel, to understand that thing. But then it's like, what about everybody who didn't? And what about like I don't know. It's just a weird thing to tack on anything of consequence to it. And, to Janet's point, like, yeah, it makes sense with Destiny. It makes sense with The Division. It makes sense with something that is ongoing. You're playing it a lot. You need those content drops. But like,
yeah,
Mario Kart was really good DLC. That's probably the only DLC I can think of where I was like, it was like a breath of fresh air. Cause like Mario Kart's the kind of game you just throw on and play. I think Smash, even though I'm no longer excited about Smash DLC because I just don't play Smash that frequently to like really want more fighters. But I think games like that do benefit from having just more stuff because it's the same inherent loop versus a single player game where it's like I'm going back in, but I'm like alone and I don't, it's just kind of a weird. The loop doesn't hit for me the same way. I think they can be fun, but it's hard to get pulled into them.
Yeah.
And there's an amount of DLC that I've installed or have bought that I've just not opened up. Like literally last week, I got all the Hitman 2 DLC, thinking that like, oh yeah, it's time. I'm feeling kind of Hitman right now. Hitman 3 trailer looked dope. All right, let's jump back into Hitman 2 and do the levels that I didn't do before. And I bought that pack. I downloaded everything and we never booted it up. Still, I might boot it up, but probably won't. Like if I'm being honest to myself, I'm not gonna play that shit. And same with Control Foundation DLC. Like that came out earlier in the year.
I want to play that too because I loved Control, but like I'm not gonna do all that. Like, but are you a real gamer if you don't install things that deep down you're not gonna play? Like
you need that backlog.
My favorite game is looking at my Switch. I know this is terrible, and like I'm sorry for people that like aren't in as much of like a privileged position to, I'm just buying really cheap, like $2, $3 things off the eShop. But my favorite game is what have I not even launched on my Nintendo Switch? Because there are so many things. I'm like, it's on sale. I'm gonna get to this. I'm gonna be the person that gets to it. And yeah, it's hard when there's so many games out.
Totally. No, that's I see it on my Switch. I see it on my PlayStation. Everybody has their backlog somewhere, but it like for me, it's not even that. It's the amount of times I will delete something from the PS4, re-download it months later with the intents, and then delete it again with ever opening it, right? Where it was like, like we were talking earlier this year, like, you know what, like maybe I should just go back and platinum Days Gone and see if, and like I've downloaded Days Gone like twice and deleted it 3 times, I guess, right? Like where it's like download, oh no, hold on, get it right. There's something else coming, and I try to keep it like a neat, tidy, like this is what I'm actually going to play. But it means that I downloaded the other day Everybody's Golf, Shadow of the Colossus, and
oh man, that's a party. That is a party right there.
That's a thing.
Yo, can we play Everybody's Golf?
Yeah.
Yo, why didn't we play that? Should have been the game we played for, because late last week you were asking for suggestions on what to do for the GameSpot stream. That would have brought me out for the GameSpot stream if we played Everybody's Golf.
You know what I mean? But you don't want to. You don't want to hang out with me. You wanted to go do whatever you did this afternoon without me. Lame.
I mean, I don't know if you would want to be involved with that. Kevin was here setting up this new camera. So I know that's a fun time.
So I want to so again, what we asked you. So here's where we're happening. We're saying spoilers are on now. You should have beaten The Last of Us Part 2 to listen to the rest of the show. I'm sorry to gatekeep on you, but you should have. And so many of you did. Thank you. It's been insane the amount of people who have written in. We said last week when we we're going to do this, so many of you wrote in. It was outrageous, the mailbag today. So spoilers are on now. You should have watched the spoiler cast. You should have just done all that stuff. You should know everything about Last of Us Part 2's ending. Before we wade into all of this, Janet, you're the one person that, if you're a PS I Love You person, you might not have heard from yet. What is your take? What is your review? What did you think of The Last of Us Part 2?
I think it's absolutely fantastic. I think it's a masterpiece of a game. Shout out to Jonathan's review, which he also gave it masterpiece on our scale. Obviously, masterpiece does not mean perfect. There is no such thing as a perfect game.
You already said there's too many dumpsters.
Yeah, there's too many dumpsters. Like dumpsters are the new floating log things. Like y'all ain't ready to have that conversation, but it's true.
They're the new pallets.
Yeah, the pallets. Thank you. Floating logs, pallets. Thank you. But yeah, I think it's absolutely fantastic. One of the best games I've played. I think. And I played The Last of Us 1 very recently, just a few months ago, and it felt like a masterpiece to me, even playing it in 2020. And yes, some parts are clunky for sure, but it still resonated with me, and I was shocked because it's a fairly old game. And playing Last of Us 2, it's so clear that they did literally everything that they did well in Last of Us 1, but better. And I didn't think that was really possible because Last of Us 1 was already a masterpiece to me. But yeah, Last of Us 2 it took it to another level in every single vertical. I adored it. It kept me entertained and engaged and excited and enthralled the entire time. It's a game I recommend to everyone, unless you played the first game and if you just don't like those kind of games, I guess maybe you can pass. But since The Last of Us 2 is so much better than 1, I think even if you weren't that keen on 1, it's worth checking out to see if your opinion has changed, because they have improved a lot of the things from the first game.
Yeah, I thought, Last of Us Part 1, in the hindsight and everybody talking about it for, 7 years or whatever, it always was like, oh, well, the gunplay is not that good. No, I can't do good gunplay, yada, yada, yada. And I really thought that, and correct me if I'm wrong for you guys, but I thought Last of Us Part 2's gunplay was so much better. And I thought it put it on to a different level of okay, cool. Not only is it the narrative game we want and the, the weird crafting exploration thing, it also is a really good action game or stealth game, depending on how you play.
Yeah, I agree. And I'm somebody who I would say that Naughty Dog figured out gunplay with the first Last of Us and made it better in Uncharted 4, and from then it's been great. But I think Last of Us Part 2 as an action game, when you look at those action elements, I think still shines very bright. And I think a lot of that is stealth. I think a lot of that even goes beyond stealth. During that initial preview of Last of Us Part 2, with their last state of play, I remember you, Greg, you compared it to Hotline Miami, and I think that is such an apt comparison of where the levels of engaged the game can get when it comes down to managing your resources and switching between weapons and doing all that stuff. That stuff I think is fantastic when it comes to the gameplay in The Last of Us.
All right, so it's time to get the best friends who wrote into patreon.com/kindoffunnygames involved. And we're going to start somewhere I didn't think we'd start. I love just putting all these questions in here. But based on what we just talked about, I want to bring Alex into the fray. I'm curious to hear whether you guys want a Last of Us Part 3. And if so, what form the game would take. When Part 1 ended, I felt like I was fine either way. The ending was satisfying, but if they had more story to tell, I would be on board for Part 2. But with this game, due to how emotionally devastating the ending was, I feel much more strongly that I want a sequel. I want Ellie to find redemption for what she's done, and I want her to find some happiness. That said, I don't know if I need another 30 hours of a game or so. I think what I'd really like is a shorter sequel that's mostly story, not as much combat. In my head, I'm thinking the Breaking Bad sequel that came to Netflix last year, which was nowhere near the length of a full season, but gave us a glimpse of where Jesse ended up and how he sought out his own redemption. I know that this may seem like an unusual way to end such an important franchise, but I think Naughty Dog has certainly proven they're not afraid to do things differently. Janet Garcia, do you want a Last of Us Part 3?
Quick answer, yes. Long answer, I want more from the world, but I don't necessarily need it to be a Part 3. I know me and Blessing talked about this a bunch on our drunk spoiler cast or drunk cast, but I feel like for me, I just trust that Naughty Dog can do interesting stories in this world that extend beyond Joel and Ellie. Of course, we do know that Last of Us Part 2 is still very much Ellie's story. She's the main character. She's who you play for the majority of the time as. It's weird being allowed to do spoilers now.
I know, right?
I'm like, oh, am I allowed to say that? But yeah, you're her, then you're Abby, but then you come back as Ellie. That's the point. It ends on her perspective. But yeah, I just want something else from this world. Like, I would love to see them even just zag and use totally different characters, even if they didn't pick anyone from part 2, just any different perspective, I think could be really exciting. I think too, one thing I liked about part 2 is you got all these glimpses into the other aspects of what the world was like. Obviously, you got reminders of things such as the outposts where they'd get rations and things,
Sure.
but you also got insights into Outbreak Day because you went to Ground Zero. And I would love to see what if they did like a short game on Outbreak Day, or what went down there, or just like there's so many stories I think to tell in The Last of Us. And I think what's interesting, and I don't know if this is how much this is intentional in terms of the naming of the game, but I've been thinking more and more on what the name The Last of Us means. And on one end, it's like there's not that many people left, so it's The Last of Us. But I also think it's speaking to the fact that The Last of Us is multifaceted. The Last of Us is not just Joel and Ellie. It's not just this family. It's not just this group. It's not just the wolves. It's all these factions and groups that you don't even know exist out there. The Last of Us is a lot of different people and families and factions. So I want to see, I guess, what else is out there in that Last of Us universe. Because this game was good as hell. And I feel like they can do it. I just trust them to do whatever now, because I also didn't think we needed part 2 at all. But part 2 was so fantastic. I'm so glad we have it. So I'm like, do whatever you want. I just want more of it because this is one of the best games I ever played.
Blessing.
I'm a bit mixed on it as far as do I want a Last of Us Part 3 because I really like where the Last of Us Part 2 ends. I like that it's not. I like that it didn't hold back in terms of ending on a somber note, and pretty much literally ending on a somber note. I think that is such a great definitive place to kind of ramp down this story, given the journey with the first 2 games. That said, if they were to make a Last of Us Part 3, part of me would really want to play a game where Lev is the main character, and it is maybe like 5-10 years into the future. You're playing as an adult Lev, and you're pretty much navigating the world. Maybe Abby's still in picture, maybe not. Who knows? I really like the idea of The Last of Us doing this baton pass with each game. Because in The Last of Us Part 1, obviously, you play as Joel, you have Ellie as your companion, and you're basically fleshing out that relationship. And the game is a game about hope. The game is a game about, hey, like, how do we make these connections at a time where we all feel defeated, and at a time where, especially for Joel as a character who doesn't want to reform that connection because he had that connection with Sarah and then lost it and it hurt him. Last of Us Part 2 coming out and being this baton pass to Ellie, and her story is a story about hate. Like that also feels very definitive in a way that I appreciate. Last of Us Part 3 finding, and I don't know, and this is kind of where I struggle. I don't know what Lev's story would be, whether it would be a story that is finding hope again, or would be a story about discovery, or would be a story about some other type of deep, intense emotion. I think there could be something fascinating there. I think there could be something really cool there. At the same time, I don't know. I don't necessarily feel like I need The Last of Us Part 3. That said, I also do like the idea that Alex gave in their question, where they talk about a scaled back experience, kind of like the Breaking Bad movie, El Camino, that was on Netflix. Because I think there's the reason why that probably wouldn't work in the grand scheme is because players aren't necessarily ready. We have Miles Morales is a thing that was announced, and we know that's $40, and that causes us to react in a way. But if Naughty Dog and Sony were to announce a Last of Us game that was, let's not even call it Last of Us Part 3, let's just call it Last of Us blank, and it is, hey, this is $30, this is a 10-hour story, and this is us wrapping up The Last of Us. I think that could be a really cool idea, and I think I think to the point in the question, scaling back the combat and making it more so of a narrative experience than The Last of Us Part 1 and 2. I think there's a really cool idea there.
Yeah, there's something
Yeah, especially in terms of, hey, we're not going to push it. We have a story we want to tell, but we don't necessarily want to tell the story for 25 hours. I think you could do something cool with that. That said, I don't know if they'd be able to pull that off in a way that worked for the audience and made people not immediately apprehensive about what that might be.
Also, really quick, I do want to say that I agree with you, Blessing. I don't want to see this. I don't really want to see Ellie get like a happy ending. I know that sounds evil. I like feeling like the knife is twisted in me every time I finish one of these games. Like, I like feeling like, oh, this is where we're ending, but also feeling like it is a close. I never want to leave The Last of Us not being destroyed. So I just want to throw that out there.
That was my thing when we're playing it, right? And the spoilers I'd seen on the internet, right, was that Abby kills Joel, and somebody had said that Abby kills Ellie too. So I was kind of waiting for that, but I didn't know. But when we got to the farmhouse after the confrontation at the theater, and Ellie's there with Dina, they have JJ. I remember like doing like, they're gonna end this and Uncharted 4 happily. Like they're gonna end The Last of Us on a happy note. Like that's not. And I remember not being mad about it, but I just thought it didn't seem true to what was happening in the game. And of course, then Tommy shows up and everything goes on. We go to Santa Barbara and everything goes to hell. So it made sense, but it was that thing of, I'm with you, of like, I don't come to these games for a happy ending. I come for this I don't know if I would have known this coming into this game, but on the other side of it, right? I come here because they are trying to make human characters in a cruel, horrible world. So there are just grays. It isn't black and white. And so, to get to that house, it felt so unfinished. It felt so unearned, that happy ending, that, yeah, I wouldn't want that. And like, I wouldn't have wanted the game to end happily. And to get to the question here, right? Like, I'm right there with both of you. If Naughty Dog comes out and Neil and Hallie are like, we have another story to tell, we're doing a Last of Us Part 3, whatever, I'm of course going to be stoked and I'm going to want to go play it and yada, yada, yada. Here on this show on June 29th, 2020, I do not want a Last of Us Part 3. I don't want anything else. I think it exists this way. And I know that there was a quote going around from Neil talking to somebody who's like, yeah, I don't know what the next project for the studio would be, if it's going to be a new IP, if it would be something going back to something like Last of Us, or it would be whatever. You're like, I don't want that, because I like how they left this with us sitting here going, like I've talked about earlier in the show, left us with a bunch of different outcomes that we all are going to sit here, I really do believe, for 5 to 10 years. And when you talk about video games, you're going to talk about your interpretation and talk about what you think, how this all worked, right? Like even the fact that like when you beat the game, the start screen is now the boat on the shore of Catalina Island, right? Like that boat is at the Fireflies base where they told Abby to go to. So it's like, did they make it? I assume they did. That's my interpretation, though. Is that what it is? Do you think Lev and Abby made it? Did one of them make it? Like what did they find when they got there? Did they get there and then have this conversation among themselves of like, yeah, we met the girl who has the cure. Wait, we have a virologist too. Like, well, let's go. You know what I mean? Like, there's a million different ways that to go, and I love that ambiguity of it. Like, the only like loose end I think in The Last of Us that needs to maybe be tugged on in some way would be Ellie's mother. I think the fact that we never got more about her, about Anna. And I always thought that, number one, that trailer we saw that turned out to be Abby being strung up, but from Paris Games Week or whatever, right? I shouldn't say me, like a whole bunch of people were like, oh my God, that's probably Ellie's mom. We're going to play this, timeline game here kind of thing. And when we didn't get that, I found that interesting. And I would think it would be a DLC like Left Behind, but they don't want to do that. So maybe it could be a short game like you're talking about, Bless. Maybe it could be something Neil got asked about in the spoiler cast, because in Uncharted 4, spoilers for the end of Uncharted 4, at the end of Uncharted 4, when you're in that bedroom, there is a poster for a Last of Us like game, graphic novel, movie, whatever, that is a pregnant woman with a gas mask on. And I forget what it's called. If it's not American Dreams is the one that's out.
This is Ellie's mom.
Pretty much, that's exactly what it is. Just a little on the nose. I think they could work on the title. But that would be something I think could be interesting in a similar way of what the question is talking about in terms of a narrative thing, where it is that we're playing the events that lead to the birth of Ellie and how all that happens. And that's where we're getting the Last of Us vibe from it. But then juxtapose it with either an ending or maybe a few segments you jump back to of what is Ellie doing? What is Ellie's plan? And if it was, I think, as simple as like, We do the entire thing, not even knowing anything about Ellie. We're just playing as Anna. And then when she's born and Anna writes the letter to Ellie that is in Ellie's backpack in Last of Us Part 1, you could easily, I think, have it be that we go back to current time and it's Ellie reading that like as a confidence booster in front of Dina's house. Right. And it's just Dina and JJ walk out the door and Ellie does that Ellie sigh like the end of Last of Us 1 and end it there. Because that, like, for me personally, being such a sucker, like, that's all I wonder about. Like, I have so many theories and all this other stuff, but like, for me, most importantly, it is like when Ellie leaves everything behind and just walks out of this room, like where Dina completely, she like lobotomized her from her life, right? She took everything else in the house that was Dina and JJ, but she left all of Ellie's stuff there. And I don't think she left it in a way of, I'm leaving this so when you come back, your stuff's here. I think it was, I'm leaving this shit because you're not a part of my life anymore. I've put you in one room and I've shut the door and I've walked away from you. And so then Ellie does the exact same thing to her stuff too, which makes me think she's totally depressed and just going to go wander and start a new life. But she could do that for 6 months and then be like, this isn't worth it and go back. And with all this information, where would that relationship be? That's what I want to know. But I don't want to know, but I want to know. Does that make sense?
Yes.
I think so.
Okay, good. Okay. Cameron, aka that_dude_cam, wrote in to patreon.com/kindoffunnygames, just like you can, to kick off the discussion here, and goes, what are your thoughts on the insane divisiveness of The Last of Us Part 2? As of right now, the user score on Metacritic has been review bombed down to an abysmal 3.5, while pretty much every gaming site on the planet has pretty much deemed it game of the generation. I've personally played almost half the story so far, just switch perspectives. I've absolutely adored it thus far, though I am intrigued to see how the latter half plays out at this point. Janet, what was spoiled for you going into Last of Us Part 2?
Nothing. And I shouldn't even say that because I feel like that is challenging the increasing number of trolls I'm gaining as I gain more followers on Twitter for next time. But I like to keep it real, and I have to be honest, nothing was spoiled. I've never been more excited to have so little clout that no one wanted to ruin my life. Like, I was like, sure, this works out great. Yeah, nothing was spoiled. I feel very lucky. I didn't even actually note, like, I didn't catch the Paris Games Week trailer, so I actually didn't even know who Abby was. So it was a real good time, and I was literally like, while I was working on the guide, I'm like, if someone spoils it now, I'm so close. Like, I'm in the game, you know. I was lucky nothing got spoiled.
So then, for you coming in sight unseen, completely blind, what was your reaction of playing Abby when the switch happens and you take over?
I was like, oh, this is why my coworkers wouldn't name the other chapters in our walkthrough outline. Very guides thing. 2, I was surprised. I was like, ooh, okay, they're doing this. But I wasn't shocked because the first game, one of my favorite elements was playing as Ellie. The switch they did when you got to play as Ellie in the cabin area was, I think, the best part of that game for me. So it doesn't shock me that they would do a switching character. They also did a switching character very early, so I felt like it was kind of a mechanical foreshadowing of what would happen later. So I was surprised, especially seeing that, like, oh, they're not just having me play as Abby. I'm Abby on day 1, so you kind of can assume it's going to be day 2, day 3. So yeah, I was surprised, but I wasn't like floored by it because I felt like there was narrative and mechanical precedent based on the earlier part of Last of Us 2 and the existence of Last of Us 1.
Were you surprised by the reaction from other people, from players?
No, though I will also say, like, to kind of address this question directly, you know, like, oh, what's with the scores? I think a lot of those scores, some of y'all didn't play the game. Like, I'm gonna throw that out there. Like, some people that go on, we've seen this with Metacritic before, day of, somehow everyone beat the game within 0 minutes. Like, it's suspicious. Like, I think that happens for a good amount of people. And then I do think there are people that maybe would have played the game but didn't because they heard leaks or they kind of knew or they watched someone do it and they just felt like they didn't want to. So I think that's more I think the Metacritic on the user score will change over time.
Of course.
Potentially as more people. But also, to be honest, like, I've never scored anything on Metacritic as like a fan. I've never done it. I love games. I don't care to do it.
I do it for every game.
It's not really. Do you actually do it for every game?
Even the ones Bless hasn't played. Even the ones Bless hasn't played. He just goes in there. He's like, based on box art.
Yeah, I've already rated Marvel's Avengers.
Having installed this several times on my PS4, I can say that this is not, So I think there's that. I also think there are a lot of Joel stans from the
Yeah.
first game.
Yeah.
Which kind of shocked me playing the game way after it came out.
Yep.
I got to the end, my boyfriend was watching me play the whole time. And when I busted into the operating room, I stood there. And I had the same thing that you had, Greg, where you've told the story a million times, where I stood there and I was like, and I kind of knew I had to, because like I done killed like everybody else in there, like the whole hospital was dead. I worked 80 people on my way up here. It's like obvious that this is the progression. But I stood there and he like stood there and I was like, we really gotta kill this doctor. And I was like, all right. And then I shot the doctor and I went about my business. I didn't shoot the other doctors though, Greg. I don't know why you killed the other doctors.
At that point, I figured I had to. If one of them stabbed me, if the main doctor stabbed me, I figured they're all going to try to stab me. I got to get it.
So I did that, and it was funny because I talked to my boyfriend right after I finished it, and I was like, telling him my thoughts, and he's like, "Oh, I immediately shot all those doctors. Like, I just had no hesitation." And I'm like, "Oh, you're trash." Like, obviously, it's all in good fun of just like talking about games. I think sometimes people get really like hurt when like, we can have different opinions on Joel and still talk about it. It's not a problem. But I do think some people, that feeling for Joel weighs so heavy that they're so in love with the story that they can't enjoy the art of the storytelling. And I think this happens for people in lots of mediums where they're like, no, this character died. I don't want to be involved anymore. I don't need to do this. And you know what? That's very valid, because you don't need to do this. It is not your job. So like, it's my job. So I don't have a choice, but you can do what you want. But I do think that if you are choosing to remove yourself from experiencing it for whatever reason, you also have to remove yourself from the critical conversation, because you've chosen not to do it. And that's fine. But then don't say it's like a 0 on Metacritic, because that's weird.
I want to keep this part of the conversation going, but let me bring in Steven, who wrote into patreon.com/kindoffunnygames and says, longtime listener, first time question asker. Having finished The Last of Us Part 2 this past Sunday and having watched streamers of the game leave their opinions, I feel as if the game isn't getting a fair shake among people streaming or being vocal. As soon as Abby becomes a playable character in the second half, countless people have been immediately checking out and refusing to see Abby's side of the story. Her story was one of the best parts of the game, in my opinion. But it is frustrating to see seeing people see who they are playing as and immediately check out for the rest of the game too, where no matter what happens, they are disappointed the entire time. Aren't willing to see where the story has to say. Thoughts? This is all what this is what's been surprising to me. I think the turn in the killing and the deaths, like, that's all surprising, but it's been this reaction. And I know I've talked about it in some of this stuff, but like when Blessing shared that initial reveal of Last of Us Part 2 at I think it was PSX, right? And you watch it and you listen to the crowd roar. I was watching it, and at the time I remember being excited. Of course, it's Last of Us, it's amazing, yada yada yada. But watching it after having beaten The Last of Us Part 2, and to think about how emotional and not emo but emo this game is, and like what it's going for, to see it celebrated like it's a Fast and Furious trailer is such a juxtaposition. And I think you nailed it, Janet, of there's so many Joel stands out there of people who every time I've said in the past that no, I think Joel's the bad guy in this story are like, what are you talking about? You don't have a daughter. You do anything you could to protect. And it's like, well, humanity and not really his daughter, but I digress. And taking away she said she didn't want this to be for nothing. You just made it for nothing. You totally invalidated her choices because yours are more important. I digress. But to get here and see the game double down on that line, right? That, Joel made a bad move here and he's going to pay for it. Whether that's right or wrong, you get to decide and play through it. Somebody put out a tweet the other day of like, bad storytelling isn't storytelling you don't agree with. The fact that you don't agree with what these characters are doing in the story doesn't mean it's a bad story. It just means that it's not what you wanted, which it's kind of fucked up because you didn't make the characters. Yeah,
and I can see that too. I think the Fast and Furious comparison, I think, is very interesting because on one hand, The Last of Us Part 2 is a very heavy action game. Like when I think of other pieces of media, I would compare it to like Walking Dead is a comparison I'd make, but that's because both of them are post-apocalyptic. That's really the only thing. And I guess if I saw a crowd cheering for Rick from The Walking Dead walking on screen, or Michonne, I wouldn't feel as taken out of it. But I don't know. I think The Last of Us Part 2 as a piece of media is just interesting in that regard because it does kind of balance this very heavy story that goes for a lot of emotion, that goes for a lot of within Last of Us Part 2 specifically, right? Goes for subverting your expectations and goes for trying to tell this do this character study that is about revenge and hate and the cycle of that and where that can lead you. And they touch on a lot of very emotional, a lot of very warm and a lot of very dark and grim subjects in a lot of those tones. But yeah, like having that trailer where Joel comes through and people shout and go crazy, right? Like it's a hard thing to balance, because I think for this type of video game, I'm not gonna say it's something new, but I think it's something that we're still kind of like not even struggling with, but reckoning with, as far as what video games are and what they mean to different people. Because for a lot of people, there are so many people that are fans of Joel. There are so many people that are fans of Ellie. There are so many people that are fans of these characters, and a big part of that is because you play as these characters for about, say, 15 hours in the first game. You have that connection, and so yeah, when those characters get lost, like on one hand, I kind of get from the fandom perspective of, oh, you killed my guy, you killed my boy, that was Joel, that was my guy. On the other hand, it's like, yeah, man, this is a game that's telling its own story. So it's such a hard thing for me to kind of grapple with and kind of balance, because even if we saw a trailer for I'm trying to think of it, if we saw a trailer for Telling Lies 2, for example, at the next whatever showcase, I wouldn't expect cheers from a crowd if they see the same characters from Telling Lies 1, because it's like, why are you cheering like this? It's not that type of story. It's not that type of game. But for The Last of Us Part 2, which is like this heavy action experience that is also mixed with like this very intense, serious experience, I almost don't know, where those reactions should lie in that case when it comes to being a fan of these characters and losing these characters in that way.
I think too, like kind of walking it a little bit back from just the gut reaction of, oh my god, like Joel's here and we're back and we're going again. Like, I think people are excited because they like the first game and they're like, another great game. So that's kind of games are weird in that people do cheer when they see trailers. It's just like, I think it's a little bit a lot for any trailer. I just am not a cheer for a trailer kind of person. But to kind of go back to that idea of people really disconnecting once you have to make the switch, at least some players. I think basically what kind of happened in a weird way, and I put out a tweet that was a lot more snippy than how I'll phrase it now, but The Last of Us 1 left me feeling like, damn, that was kind of like, it's kind of fucked up. Like, Joel kind of did some fucked up shit. Now we're just going to walk away like, we're going to learn how to swim. I'm like, that was sketchy and weird and crazy. And that's how I left feeling when I finished Last of Us 1. But I think if you did think Joel was right, you didn't feel that way. And that game actually isn't as dark to that person as it was to me. And The Last of Us 2 does the same thing. It's like, it kind of makes Ellie, it eventually paints Ellie in a darker light. And Last of Us 1 painted Joel eventually in a darker light. Though, to be honest, Joel was in a dark light immediately. It got better and then went back again, but we can have that that's a kind of a separate conversation. And what kind of really floors me is what I basically said on Twitter was, some of y'all are mad at The Last of Us 2 for doing exactly what The Last of Us 1 did. The only difference is your reaction. You happen to agree with what Joel was doing, so you stuck with him through, that decision because you were in support of it. You didn't agree with what Ellie was doing, either whether you thought she shouldn't go on this quest or whether you didn't like that she didn't finish it off. Now that Ellie is kind of shown as evil, you can't handle it. But like that happened with Joel too. So it kind of, to me, just sort of exposed that divide in the fandom. And I think it's also a divide that I'm not sure how the creators felt like leaving when Last of Us 1 came out, because I'm kind of surprised with how many people thought Joel was like in the right there, and I think that's what caused like such a severe flip for Last of Us 2.
Yeah, and I think again, where I think this is going to be one we talk about for so long, it's interesting that so many people talked about Last of Us Part 1 but didn't get that, didn't argue that, didn't see the other side of it, of like, why no, Joel isn't necessarily doing the right thing. You know what I mean? Didn't even sit there and have that argument. And what then is shocking is what you mentioned here is like, I've seen so much feedback, and even in people here, and again, this isn't like you're wrong, it's just not what I would have ever thought. So many people that are like, and in the end, Ellie doesn't even kill Abby. Why didn't she do it? This whole thing was for nothing. And it's like, well, yeah, but she finally got the lesson, right? Like the entire time as she's gearing up to set off and leave Jackson, I personally just want to shake her and be like, no, like, you look at the cycle here of like what you're doing of revenge. Like you're becoming Joel. Did Joel seem happy? Did Joel should have taken whatever chance he could have had to have a easy life and fall in love and you know what I mean, just chill out and be a person rather than chase these things, these ghosts and these ideas across the world. But you're about to go do that, and you don't see how that's going to lead you to the exact same spot. And let alone the fact of, like, I know she isn't talking to Abby, but us as players know that Abby has done what Ellie is setting out to do, and Abby is not fulfilled. Abby has lost the man she loved. She has this amazing physique that was built for one reason, to kill Joel, and now she's just this person that was consumed by one thing, and she has it now, and it's back to hunting scars, I guess. Like, that's now your purpose. Like, she's not happy. Why would we project that onto Ellie and want that? Why wouldn't we want her redemption at the end? I digress. John Fick writes in with one of the reviews that we got and says, The Last of Us Part 2 is devastating. It's a story not just about anger and revenge, but about the cost and the worth of seeing them through. It's a story that's meant to make you uncomfortable. You'll need to take some breaks, and you'll beg the story to go in a different direction than it's ultimately going. It's a game about understanding perspectives other than your own, and in that, it succeeded tenfold. Of course, it is still a game, and it's without a doubt the best game Naughty Dog has made in terms of the way it plays. You'll be nudged to be stealthy with some of the best single-player level design I've ever seen, and if you try to ignore that, you'll find yourself emptying your inventory just to get through a small firefight. The hopelessness you feel when you're out of literally everything you need to win the fight is perfectly mirrored in the hopelessness you'll feel with the reason you're fighting in the first place. The Last of Us Part 2 is a masterpiece. Dun, dun, dun. Agreed. And well said, I thought. So many people wrote in with questions. Other people just wrote in to heap praise on it. And a lot of these reviews, or these questions, I've edited out the entire front that is like, hey, Blessing, hey, Greg, love all the discussions. This is what's going on. Thought the game, and I'm like, all right, let's get to the question. But so many people wrote in with just pure reviews. I want to make sure they were.
Yeah, I like the pure reviews, because for this game in particular, especially, I really enjoy hearing and seeing what people have to say about it, because
Totally.
I think this is one of those games where more so than even more so than a game like Death Stranding that came out late last year that had such a polarized discussion about it. I think this game, it kind of being more of a traditional action stealth post-apocalyptic game, kind of allows those discussions to be a little bit more focused in terms of what we're actually talking about, what we're actually breaking down. Because with Death Stranding, a lot of that conversation was, all right, like, Kojima's being weird, and like, okay, but should Kojima be allowed to be weird? And in what ways is this weird? Is this weirdness fun? And like a lot of those conversations got muddy and ridiculous in ways that it's like, can we actually talk about what this man is doing in the game, or what the themes here are, or what this actually means? And so yeah, with The Last of Us Part 2, I do enjoy the fact that it seems like people are more so picking apart things that the actual game is doing here, and we're able to actually have deeper conversations about it.
Exactly. There's a real discussion going on about the messages and the symbolism and that. I don't think I don't want to talk completely out of turn, but I don't see people arguing about the gameplay of how was the gameplay good, or was the shooting bad, or was the stealth fun. Like, that's not even part of it. It's more the intentions, the story, the reasoning, the characterizations, which is a fascinating thing to see. And what I think is, like, again, what I hope, as our medium continues to evolve, we see more of. Because Death Stranding was like, I thought it was boring. I thought it was meditative. All right. And then we're all like, and Kojima's weird. There's a baby on a beach. You know what I mean? It was
what's
weird.
a BT? What does this represent?
Yeah. And so that's what's been fascinating about it. And in this vein, Owen Shannon writes into patreon.com/kindoffunnygames and says, has The Last of Us Part 2 broken video game reviews? I imagine every video game review gets met with outrage from someone, parentheses, i.e. Greg's Uncharted 3 review, which I personally agree with, end parentheses. But the outrage around this game strikes me as different. For the most part, it seems like gameplay-heavy reviews are unanimously perfect, but story-heavy reviews are more scattered. There have been a handful of times that a game has reached there have only been a handful of times that a game has reached such a high level of technical quality that it would seem impossible to give it anything less than a perfect score. Story aside, arguing that The Last of Us Part 2 deserves less than a perfect score in the technical realm is almost absurd. Other games that fit this criteria, to me, include Red Dead 2, God of War, and Uncharted 4. I see these games as being in another class because they are so technically impressive that they earn the ability to be discussed as movies or literature rather than as games. I think my own question is best seen through the difference between Dornbush's review for IGN and Callie's review for GameSpot. Dornbush focused more on his opinion of the game itself, with vague allusions that the story is emotional or thrilling. But Callie focused more on how the story impacted her experience with a game. I believe it is almost impossible not to give The Last of Us Part 2 a 10 from the Dornbush approach. But Callie's choice, essentially to review her thoughts on the story, make her 8 perfectly valid as well, especially since the quality of the game demands it. But surely saying that The Last of Us Part 2 is an 8 out of 10 is underselling it, right? I guess what I'm asking should a game like The Last of Us Part 2 be punished for demanding more in-depth discussion? Video games are often reviewed as products, as Blessing has been saying, where the quality of the gameplay is the most heavily weighted aspect and the story is gravy. So, should games media make the distinction in the future when a game is so high quality that the story becomes the review and the gameplay is the gravy?
I really like this question. There's a lot here, and
it's a podcast unto itself now.
I really like where this question went. I do disagree with one part of it, and that is where Owen says, story aside, arguing that The Last of Us Part 2 deserves less than a perfect score in the technical realm is almost absurd. I disagree. For me, when it comes to The Last of Us Part 2, mainly the issues I have are with gameplay. Like the way I've kind of been describing this game as the weeks have gone is the fact that for me, The Last of Us Part 2 is both the most unpredictable Naughty Dog game and the most ambitious Naughty Dog game, and also in a lot of ways the most predictable Naughty Dog game. In terms of, I've been watching friends play the game for the first time themselves. Just to either like experience it again or to see their gameplay of it. And a thing that keeps kind of getting brought up is the fact that at a certain point, like every few minutes you're going to come across the locked door. At a certain point, like you're going to have to find another way around to get to a place. At a certain point, like something is going to divert your journey to make what would have been like a 5-minute task turn into a 3-hour character arc that turns into a whole thing. And a big part of that is that's Naughty Dog's game design philosophy. That's how they go about things. That's how they go about making their games. And I think for the most part, a lot of that stuff works. But for me, and now that we can even talk about spoilers, I can talk about like the Abby stuff freely. For me, like that last half of the game, even though I like that stuff the most, story wise, narrative wise, I think gameplay wise, that's where a lot of stuff started to get paced out, or that stuff started to be long in the tooth for me in a way where the pacing was thrown off, in a way where I started to feel like, all right, this stuff is kind of lasting too long. Each chapter, like I feel like this is kind of going on forever in certain places. And again, like when it comes down to when we zoom back, zoom out, I'm like, all right, yeah, this gameplay is fantastic. Overall, I really enjoyed this experience, but I do think there are things there that you can kind of pick apart that wouldn't necessarily make it as a pure technical gameplay experience a 10 out of 10. If you want to talk about graphics, you want to talk about presentation, a lot of other things, I would say those things are a 10 out of 10 for me, but I don't think it's as like definitive that story aside, everything else, like easily like absurd not to be a 10 out of 10. I don't necessarily agree with that. The part of the question though, where Owen's talking about should a game like The Last of Us be punished for demanding more in-depth discussion, I think is really interesting. And I think it's a double-edged sword, because I think for Last of Us Part 2, a game that feels like it's doing a lot in its story and its narrative and in its gameplay and how those things interact with the violence that goes on and the cyclical nature of violence and the commentary that it has on that, you are kind of inviting critique. You are inviting more critique the more the more in depth you go into those topics and in those things that you're tackling. And so in some ways, like, yes, I agree that The Last of Us Part 2, it goes way deeper than so many games, right? Like The Last of Us Part 2 is a deeper game than Mario Odyssey. It's a deeper game than even so many other action games that come out that are in the same genre. But I do think when you go that deep, you do bring on the risk of, hey, there are more things to pick apart. There are more things to talk about. There are more reasons for me. Like, even though there are more reasons for me to love this game, there are also more reasons for me to take issue with it and have problems with it.
Sure. Janet?
Mario Odyssey is also a game where you play as the villain for a certain point, and it's one of the best parts of the game. Just gonna throw that connection out there, just because it popped into my head when you said that. There's a lot to unpack here. I will not be able to probably unpack all of it, but I'm going to try to
take your best shot.
Yes. Oh, there's so many things. I guess I'll add to what Blessing said. I totally agree. I also don't think, and this is one reason we like backed up from the point something, like 9 point something. We just now have the flat numbers. When we had the points, people kind of felt like well, why is this an 8.7 and not an 8.8? What's the 0.7 for? And I'm like, you just sense it. And that wasn't really a good answer for anyone. So that's why we removed it, because there's not a good way to explain that to readers. Everyone approaches game reviews differently. Every outlet, every YouTuber, podcaster, whatever. We, for the most part, and these two outlets specifically, no longer calculate reviews in any way. There's no like, the graphics are this, the sound is this.
Yeah,
like,
this is how you're like, there was a scientific method that it all added up to the thing.
Exactly. And then I fundamentally disagree with the idea of a game being so technically proficient that it's a 10. I don't think technical proficiency gives you anything other than a tip of the hat to you, even though I don't actually understand how to make games. So I can't even tell what you did that was impressive, because I don't know game development. Red Dead, actually, it's funny they bring up Red Dead 2. I think that's I don't like that game. I think it's aggressively dull and very clunky. It looks beautiful. That didn't make me like it anymore or appreciate it from a critical perspective anymore if I were to, analyze it. So I definitely disagree with that. Just not even using Last of Us 2 as an example. I think Blessing pointed out a lot of good critiques in that regard. I just don't think there is such a thing of it being a technical 10. Like, it being running well has nothing to do with whether or not the game is good. It's just like, you made a thing that worked really well or that looked really good. That's it. As far as the question of should a game like The Last of Us 2 be punished for demanding a more in-depth discussion, I'm going to push back on the idea that having story be a large role in how you review a game is a punishment. I think if your game is a story-driven game, the story matters a lot. If the story in Gone Home sucked, that game wouldn't have been good. I think the story is fantastic. I think the gameplay lends to the story really well. Thus, I analyze the story of Gone Home a lot more than I do in, like, I guess I'll just use Mario Odyssey again. We've already mentioned Apex. Anything else, it's not the same because it's a different game trying to do a different thing. The Last of Us 2 and The Last of Us in general has always been very story driven. So if you don't think the story is good, the gameplay is not crazy. There's nothing, in my opinion, in terms of feel, I think God of War is a more intriguing gameplay experience than like The Last of Us 2 even is, just in like how the Leviathan Axe feels like. But we don't review games like that. We don't really piecemeal them. It's true that oftentimes story isn't as relevant. It's always mentioned, but in certain games, you really just don't need it to have a good story. Tetris doesn't have a good story, and it's one of the greatest games of all time. It just depends on the kind of game you're trying to make. I think too, it's kind of interesting that Owen also, this person's named Owen.
Shouldn't have met with Mel. Mel's terrible. Mel was a little annoying. Okay. Mel did nothing wrong, but I didn't really like Mel. It's interesting that this person mentions that if you, based on how Jonathan reviewed it and how Callie reviewed it, both their scores make sense. I'm going to say that's not based on how they reviewed it. I think that's based on how they wrote the review. Yep.
And I think it makes sense that Jonathan gave it a 10 and his review reads as a 10. Callie gave it an 8 and her review reads like an 8, or at least very close to something around there. I think that's just how they felt about the game. I think they had different readings of the text. For Jonathan, clearly the story was dynamic and thrilling. And for Callie, who went back and did a spoiler version of her review, which you guys should check out if you haven't already, for her, it felt a little bit too one note and she had other criticisms of it. I think those are valid interpretations and they're just different ways to go about it. For me, saying, like, I wouldn't say it's an 8 out of 10 game, The Last of Us 2. That's underselling what I think of the game. But once again, that's why we all have different opinions on games. Like, it's an undersell to you, but to someone, it might be an oversell. Like, there are people that just don't find this gameplay or the story interesting enough to really be worth the hype. I strongly disagree, but that's just a difference in opinions.
Yeah, I think, he starts it has The Last of Us Part 2 broken video game reviews. I would argue that The Last of Us Part 2 has proven why it's the best time to be someone who consumes video game reviews. I love the fact that we can have this conversation and that IGN can be one thing, GameSpot can be another, Kotaku, Polygon, down the, us on YouTube, right? Like, easy allies. You name it, somebody else has it. And to exactly what you're saying, Janet, they're laying out their argument and backing it up. They're making a case for it. And as Owen says, like, Callie's case works, Jonathan's case works. Like, that's what this is. And, even talking to Neil on the spoiler cast, like, they knew this was going to be a game that was divisive and they knew that it would, like, some people would dig it, some people wouldn't. Like, I think they, especially like you're saying, for being a narrative game, like that's what The Last of Us is known for, right? They knew what they were getting into. And I think these are the kind of discussions they wanted. Like, I don't think they're worried about the score being an 8 instead of a 10 on this one. Because again, obviously, I think, the Metacritic's pretty good for them right now. And I would imagine with my Magic 8 ball that, game of the year is going to look pretty good for them too. Like, I think they're going to do quite nice, in terms of even just noms, if we want to go that far, let alone wins, because who knows what Cyberpunk's going to do. Who knows when Simon Carty's going to re-review Predator Hunting Grounds and give it the score it deserves. Like, there's a whole bunch of different things that could happen there, but like this outside, and it's because it's such a fucking weird ball of wax right now. Outside of the leaks and the harassment and the review bombing, this kind of discussion, the reaction you're having, good or bad, sad or happy, is what they want. They wanted to hit you emotionally and have you care enough about their world, their universe, their characters to have a reaction like this. And so, I don't think this is video game reviews are broken. I think that this is video game reviews work. And, as somebody who at IGN had worked with both the 20-point scale, the 100-point scale, then the 20-point scale, then the 100-point scale again before I left, like, I always liked the 20-point scale better because it was, hey, this isn't science. There is no scientific method. I wish there was, that you put a game into a machine and it went beep, bop, beep, bop, and this is the actual score. This is how it makes sense. No, this is art, and everybody's going to find something different in art. And that's why I think you're having so many great discussions about this game.
I think too, really quick in terms of scores, because I think people, maybe don't know a lot about the process of reviewing a game, especially like a written review, which is very different than like, a podcast or even just a video review, where it's a lot of people watch our video reviews and they're like, this is your review. And it is, but it's also a very shortened version of what our, I wrote like 2,000 words on like CTR. Like, I made a 3-minute video. We made a 3-minute video on that. That's not my full review. No one's going to watch like a 20-minute video on a racing game, like a remake. But a lot of the way we go about scoring, I think people think that we're just like, this is the score, and then we like write down a review. It's actually the opposite. Like, and I imagine, I'm sure Callie put in plenty of thought and work into her review. She reviewed it twice. So like, this is clearly someone who's thought very carefully about this game. And that number is more of a reflection on what was written and what was felt and what was thought about. It's not like a guttural reaction. So, that's why they should match, because you don't really know what you feel about a game in terms of review until you really formally get it out there, whether it's through writing, through conversation, or through whatever. So I think it's always something important to keep in mind. I think sometimes people think that we don't put as much thought, even though we clearly wrote a lot of words. But like, this is always the last thing that's decided after careful consideration.
I want to go in a different direction here with Gal Brandt, who wrote in to patreon.com/kindoffunnygames, just like you can, and says, do you think the reception of The Last of Us Part 2 would have been any different if the marketing only focused on Abby instead and made no mention of Joel and Ellie? Basically, a reverse Metal Gear Solid 2. I felt if I played Abby first during the Seattle chapters, first during the Seattle chapters with Abby's WLF friends, and get to bond with them first, and then maybe have a reference to Jackson throughout the chapters, and having the reveal about Abby's father in day 2, and this is just one run-on sentence, I'm sorry, and then have the Ellie boss fight. There
are no periods in this thing.
Yeah, I know, right? Yeah, but you understand what Gal Brandt's driving at here, right? Of like, what if we played it in reverse? Yeah. I had a really difficult time giving Abby's point of view a chance. Yara and Lev were the only ones I cared about in Abby's chapters, and Lev is the real MVP. I just think if I didn't have all the hatred for Abby beforehand, I would have been more conflicted about Ellie's revenge. The only time I gave Abby the time of day is when I saw her on the pillar, or saw her at the pillar. That's when my hatred for her evaporated. That's when I was finally against Ellie, when she drew the knife on Lev, and when Ellie was in the process of drowning Abby. What do you think of this take? I think this has been interesting. Even, Hallie Gross, one of the writers alongside Neil, co-writers of the game, put up a Twitter photo the other day that was like, oh yeah, and here's like one of the things when we were talking about maybe moving around the timeline. And it was a different look, and having the barn scene way up front, like having the, a totally different look at how the game would have shaken out. Do you think reaction would have been less visceral if we would have played as Abby, not knowing, I guess, that she killed Joel, but knowing something had happened in Jackson?
Man, that's a deep question.
It's the multiverse kind of thing, right? Of like trying to take a game you did and look into it. And
there's probably a universe where this game exists, if you guys believe in like parallel universes.
Yeah, right.
And I do. So
we gotta ask them.
in terms of the marketing, if the marketing only focused on Abby, and we did know that we were going to get Joel and Ellie until we started playing the game, I think as an artistic move, as like a piece of like viral marketing, I guess, I think that could be really cool. I think that then lends to the game selling way less copies and people being way upset way beforehand. I don't think people would have been able to take that, because we associate The Last of Us with Joel and Ellie, which I think when you look at the visceral reaction, specifically like a lot of the pre-release reaction to spoilers in terms of that anger, I think when you look at that, what you can boil that down to is that people just associate The Last of Us with Joel and Ellie, and people are such big fans of just Joel and Ellie. And so when we get to that point in the game where Joel is taken away from us so early, and then you get to that point in the game where the game then switches to Abby, I think people are just thrown off by it. And I think moving that process up to the trailers and to the marketing and to the rollout, as opposed to, hey, let's just throw them in the game and let them see for themselves. I think it would have gotten, if anything, maybe even more vitriol. That would have maybe like been that would have gotten better as the game came out and people actually experienced it. But I think that I still think that you would have gotten more vitriol that way, as opposed to the way they already did it.
Yeah, I think it depends on. Oh, go ahead, Greg.
No, please. That's the fun part of these calls, right? Where it's like, wait, are we saying something or what's that? I don't know.
It's like, is this a pause? Are you frozen? We don't really know. Yeah, it's the drawback of not having actual eye contact with people. But it could go either way. I think Blessing brings up a good point of, well, definitely the sales probably wouldn't be as good. Yeah. And I think it might make Ellie look more. It depends on. I'd have to somehow get the statistics on what people are really angry about. I think we have several answers for what people are angry about, putting aside the really dark answers, like just regular story stuff. Like, I think that would make Ellie look more evil, so maybe people would be more angry. Like, because I think that's part of what people didn't like about it. That, like, now we see Ellie as, like, this bad person, and not only is she a bad person, she's a bad person that doesn't even finish her evil job. This is the worst, like,
the worst villain of all time.
A bad person with no follow-through. Like, you hate to see it. Yeah, so I think it would have made people enjoy playing as Abby initially more, but I do think if they were to unveil like the murder of Joel, people still would have completely flipped, and then I guess the emotions would have just been in a different order, essentially, is kind of how I see that playing out.
I think I
probably wouldn't want to play that Metal Gear game that they advertised, because I did not want to be right
in this universe that this happens. I feel like the backlash would have been even more severe if we start playing as Abby after the events. You go through, you don't fully understand it, and then it's this reveal that you're the one who kills Joel, and we see everything that happens in the chateau or whatever. Like, I feel that would have been it, making you love her and then revealing she's a terrible person in air quotes, right, would have really pissed people off. I think it's more interesting to see her start from the place of, this is a villain, she's the bad, the way we understand video games, that like Ellie's the hero, Abby's the villain. That is clear as day. And then as you play through, and you're like, why am I playing as the villain? And then hopefully, if the game does its job and you allow it in, it does this thing of like, well, no one's the villain. There's, she's somebody who was wronged in the same way, Ellie's now been wronged. So why are you cheering for Ellie, but cursing Abby? It doesn't make any sense, right? That's what this is all about. It would have, I think, if you would have gone all that way and been like, sure, this Abby girl's cool. Yeah, the game sold way less. This Abby girl's cool, and then get to this point of like, wait, what the fuck? I killed?
Is that Joel?
Yeah, exactly. I killed Joel.
I've seen this is the first game.
Yeah, exactly. I think people would have lost their minds, and granted, they already did.
That would have been. I would honestly, as a twist, I wish I could live in the dimension where that happened, where you're playing this game where you have no idea that Joel and Ellie is there, and then halfway through the game, you get to a boss fight, and you're like, huh. It looks like that's Joel. Oh snap! And then you kill him. I'd want to see the audience reaction to that. Like,
I mean, yeah, dude. I mean, for reactions for sure. If you're going through that whole thing and it is that you're playing at you and Lev approach the theater and like you're trying to find a way in and you finally find a way in and you find the paperwork and like they've been hunting us and you get fucking down there and fucking Ellie bursts through the door and like the first time we've seen her in 10 hours or whatever. Holy shit, that'd be incredible.
That I'm stressed hearing you guys describe what this game is, because in general, the theater scene made me feel ill in a lot of ways. Because you're just walking up there and like, I don't know about y'all, but like when we first got to the theater, I'm like, I feel like you should make that ladder seems a little close to the ground for anyone to just bust into this safe theater you have. sure no one will take advantage of that 10 hours later. And like,
well, I mean, like just in
no
general,
what's gonna
showing up in
happen.
the amount of light that's pouring out of that, just being like, we're here. I'm like, oh God, no.
Like,
Yeah.
I love how many times this game makes you feel like you just don't want to be in it anymore, but like in
Yeah.
a really compelling and twisted way. But maybe I'm just messed up. But so is everyone in the game, so I feel like it's fine.
You fit right in.
horrible.
Let's talk about that feeling. June M writes into patreon.com/kindoffunnygames to be part of PS I Love You XOXO, just like you can. It says, I finished The Last of Us Part 2 last night and haven't stopped thinking about it. I am honestly very torn about the experience, despite enjoying the moment to moment. I think my biggest disappointment in the game is simply that there is not enough direct dialogue or textual evidence to indicate that the characters are learning the lessons the game is attempting to teach the player. I noticed this most during the island area with Lev, in which Abby says the monumental line, "You are my people," to him. Abby literally kills her former allies to save his life in a very similar way that Joel did for Ellie. It is not clear that Abby even realizes this. In the end, too, I would have liked a moment of realization from Ellie that Lev is in a similar position to the one she was once in as well, and that Abby would do the same thing as taking Joel. You know what I mean? These things seem obvious to the player narratively, but doesn't seem as obvious to the characters themselves. Ellie doesn't kill Abby, but it's not clear that Lev factors much into it. What do you think? Do the characters understand the parallels between their own stories? Do they feel empathy for each other and Joel? Will there be an opportunity in the future for us to see these characters express this more explicitly? Janet, do you think the characters are in the moment learning their lesson?
No.
Yeah.
Absolutely not. Like, it's just what this game does is what I think a lot of different fiction potentially does, because it's all storytelling in different forms. That's what sucks about being third person omniscient, guys. Like, even though we're controlling the characters, so it's kind of POV is kind of weird in games because you're also in the game because you're playing the characters, but you can see both sides. We have the privilege of that, and that's why so often, there are dramas. This often happens with like dramas, or even maybe sometimes horror movies, where people in your mind, or maybe even aloud, depending on if you're at home, you might be like, "Oh no, like I do this one thing," or "Why can't you see this?" Because it's so obvious. But it's only obvious because we have the privilege of seeing all of it. We're like a god looking down on everything. So yeah, I mean, the reason that we make the connection, the characters don't, is because Abby and Ellie have never spoken to each other outside of like, "Let me never see you again," or "I let you live."
Yeah.
And it was, quick little fighting quips.
They don't know each other.
Yeah, they have no idea. They have no idea what's happening with the other person. All they see is this person showed up to kill me, and then this person also showed up to kill me again, or this person killed whoever. Or, "I know you killed so and so because I saw their body." Like, it's these passing things. They're not going to be. I mean, I think one way to think about it is if you were one of those characters and you only saw your day 1, 2, and 3, what would you think? Like I also like too that it's not in your face whether or not there's any emotional growth. We get some hints at things, like clearly Abby cares about Lev and she's kind of seeking redemption through that in ways that we've seen through other characters. And Ellie, I don't know, she's just broken and just all types of messed up and just sitting there, and it's dark, and you're just like, sometimes you don't always get, like, in life there's not these neat tidy endings, and I think the lack of concrete growth from these characters is an expression of that.
That's the thing for me personally, like, right? And we want to talk about, like, again, yeah, you're in this weird murderer standoff with someone who's killed somebody, whether you're Abby or you're Ellie in this thing. Like, that's such a crank it to 11 thing, but take it back and put into any time any of us have experienced emotional growth. I don't know about you guys, that so rarely happens to me in the moment. When I'm yelling at somebody, when I'm in a fight, not like a fist fight, but you know what I mean? Like an argument, or like even when I just feel that I'm right. And it's not till you later with a cooler head sit back and reflect on it, right? And I think that's the whole point of Ellie having won. She's on top of Abby. She's drowning Abby. This is what she wanted, right? This is in quotes what she wanted. But there is this flash of Joel. And it is this, I can't forgive you, but I want to try memory, and where they left their relationship. And I think which plays into the relationship she had. And then and on some level see Abby with Lev and the way she wanted to protect. And like when Abby came off the pillar, right, it wasn't immediately like, I'm going to fuck you up. It was, I'm going to get Lev. And then I started walking and then looked back and like, there's boats this way, like explained to her, like, come on, let's get out of here. Like I think there are enough breadcrumbs there that you have to assume the characters are having those moments on their own. In the same way, I think that Abby never sits down in this game and is like, man, my quest to kill Joel was empty. I thought, she doesn't have this like soliloquy of like, I thought it would solve everything and I would have a perfect life afterwards, but I've done it and nothing is solved and I'm still super sad and everything's still fucked up. Like, that's left for us to see through animations and moves and Abby, taking over for Yara and Lev and being like, no, like, you're my people. Like, let's redeem this. Let's do something.
Yeah, I'm there too. And in a way, I don't necessarily think The Last of Us Part 2 is a game that is trying to say it's not a game about revenge being bad per se. Right. Yeah. It's a game about the road to destruction that you're headed down on that cyclical cycle on that cycle of revenge. But I don't think the characters get that anywhere near the way that we get that, to the point that Janet's saying, right? Us as a third party, we're able to understand that lesson because we're seeing all these chess pieces at play and where they lay and how they end up. I remember at a certain point in Abby's story, I can't remember if this is a note she finds or if this was a story that she was telling Manny, but on their way to like walking somewhere, they were talking about revenge. They were talking about, hey, yeah, there were like these two factions and they kept like, these guys went and like, killed some of their people. And so their people actually returned fire. And that's why like there's a war here. And they're really like nailing it home that like, oh yeah, revenge is a thing. Oh yeah, the revenge is leading to these warring factions and is leading down this road to destruction. In that moment, Abby's not like, oh yeah, I did get revenge on Joel, didn't I? Man, that kind of sucked. No, but she's very aware that revenge in this this cycle of violence is bad. But I don't think the point of the game is the lessons that the characters learn from that. I think it is more so just an illustration to us, the audience, that yeah, hey, no, this is where this path led them. And towards the end of the game, we do get that point where Ellie gives up on the fight and is like, I'm going home. And I think even with Abby, right? Like when Lev stops her, you see Abby go, all right, yeah, I'm not gonna do this. I'm just gonna go. But I think those are very much meant to be those, I guess, subtle indications of that. And they're so subtle that at points I'm like, I don't know if they even really got the message. Like I don't know if Ellie went home and was like, yeah, revenge is bad. I learned a thing today. I think Ellie was just at a point of being fed up emotionally and fed up by being eaten away at this thing that, it was worth her just leaving alone and going home.
I think too, I love that you brought up that scene between Abby and Manny. I think Mel was there too, but who would know? Because we just forget Mel exists.
Yeah, Mel doesn't exist.
It doesn't matter. But when they were talking about that, I think it might have been Mel who brought up, oh, but they were just kids. And they were like, yeah, well, they were kids, but they got caught up. So like, we're just going to kill them the same way we kill everybody else. It doesn't matter. And we see Abby literally use that line like a few hours later to say like, they're just kids, like talking about the Seraphites, Yara and Lev. So I actually would argue that we see indicators of like at least change. It might not be growth for the positive, but these are not the same people that started this game. Who they were on Seattle day 1, is not the same person they were on Seattle day 3 or at Santa Barbara. And we even see that physically manifested too. Obviously you can say, oh, it's because they were like the Rattlers or whatever, but like this is the only, Ellie has gone through so much physical crap because it's a video game. But Santa Barbara is where she has the wound that you just can't get the bandages to heal, right? There's a reason for that. They made that as an intentional decision. So I think it's subtle, but there are indicators of that change. I also don't feel like this game was meant to give the player a specific message. I think like any text, I'm sure there was obviously creator intent for what the creators wanted players to leave feeling or thinking about. But ultimately, there's a bunch of different themes you can pull from The Last of Us 2 because it's a very dynamic story. And that's why I don't think it's just a game about hate or a game about revenge is bad or killing people is bad or don't stab the dog because that's someone's dog. Like, I think it goes way deeper than that. And there's so many ways to analyze it, which a lot of readers actually did, which I thought was, always cool to read other people's perspectives on that.
Blessing, you said something interesting when you were talking. You don't think that when Ellie got home, she was like, revenge is bad, this was all for nothing? And I mean, not like obviously in that exact thing, but like her playing the guitar or trying to play the guitar, right? And singing Future Days, which again, I can't compliment Naughty Dog enough on the fact that like that, that opening, I don't know, anyway, the opening lyrics of Future Days like sums up her relationship with Joel, her relationship with Dina, her relationship with Abby, Abby's relationship, like, of just like, if I ever lose you, I'd surely lose myself. I think when she tries to play it at the end and can't play it, is literally her not saying it, but I think we're as clear as day in her head that like, I've lost myself. I've literally chased this stupid thing and I lost Dina, which means I lost myself, and I lost Joel and I lost myself.
I don't think she sees it in the same way that we see it. Like I think for her, I think that her giving up that chase of Abby and being like, I'm going home and not worrying about that. I think that is more so just a reflection of that pain eating her, like eating her from the inside, and her being like this isn't her. I guess her saying this isn't the solution is probably isn't in the same way her learning the lesson. But I think I kind of see it as kind of a different lesson than what we're seeing as an audience. Because as an audience, I think we got that message halfway through the game. We got that message way earlier in terms of, okay, yeah, revenge leads down this destructive path. I think for Ellie, when she starts playing that song, I think it was more so just like exhaustion more than anything. I think I don't think she necessarily learned the lesson in like a mindful sense. I think she kind of learned it just from a breaking down emotionally and physically sense. Like I physically can't continue the cycle because it has broken me so much.
Okay, that's fair. Let's get another review in here. Jay writes into patreon.com/kindoffunnygames, just like you can, and says, the only thing I wanted to say is that I absolutely loved this game. And as someone who has lost my father in the last 3 years when I was finishing up my last year of university, it was especially hard seeing Joel get hit by the golf club. But it was honestly the right call to make the game. The death of Joel puts us in the same shoes as Ellie, that we are angry and out for Abby. It is super impactful in my honest opinion and carries with it more weight than the death of, say, Dina, instead just because of our emotional connection in real life to Joel. To all the fans that are out there that are upset with the game and filing a petition to change the story, I honestly feel disgusted by their actions. Because in real life, when we have someone we care about a lot, they can be taken away from us at any moment. There is no fanfare. There is no preparation for the moment. It happens, and it's this gut-wrenching feeling, and no amount of people signing a petition will bring that person back to me in real life. The fact that people are petitioning to change this story, it feels like a spit in the face to people who have actually lost someone important to them. You could say that it's a game and it tells a fictional story, but this game aims to tell a more realistic / grounded story than, say, Uncharted. And I think that that's why it's more impactful. The only gripe I really had about the game was that Tommy was given plot armor. But sometimes people do luck out in real life as well. Sorry for the rant here. I absolutely love the game, and some of the fan reaction feels so insulting to me.
Yeah,
Tommy really is indestructible.
That happens, man.
How many times did we think Tommy died? At least twice?
At least
maybe
2.
3 times?
Yeah, twice for sure. Well, yeah, I didn't think when he fell in the water, you didn't think he was dead, right? Yeah.
I didn't think he was dead.
Because like there was when he went to him and Joel, went to the house with Abby and them, and I think Tom gets hit in the head with a rock.
You're right. He goes down.
And that was the first time, and the other time was when Abby literally shoots him, and it's like, okay, he's definitely dead now, and then he shows up later.
Just a grazing one, yeah. Yeah,
just a grazing one, but you think she shoots his head off. That's how I saw it.
No, for sure. I thought he was dead when I saw Jesse get dropped and then him get shot over there.
Yeah, and so I thought he was done for, but good for him, man. He's surviving. Gotta respect it. Love to see it.
Blessing. I have a great one about Tommy, a great question about Tommy, but for some reason I can't find it on my documents, so I'm going to dig it out. While I do that, why don't you tell them about our sponsor, youtube.com/kindoffunnygames?
Oh, our sponsor is youtube.com/kindoffunnygames. Janet, can I tell you about that YouTube channel there, youtube.com/kindoffunnygames?
Absolutely.
Do you know about our show, Kind of Funny Games Daily?
If I didn't, I think I'm about to find out.
Yeah, Kind of Funny Games Daily is a daily news show. Happens 5 days a week, Monday through Friday. It's hosted by people like me, people like Greg Miller, people like Imran Khan, people like Tim Gettys, and we just talk about the video game news that happens every day. It happens 10 a.m. every single weekday. YouTube.com/kindoffunnygames, Twitch.tv live twitch.tv/kindafunnygames live. You can catch it there. We also have things such as Gamescast, where we talk about our big old video game reviews. We do topical episodes, talk about an arrangement of stuff, a whole bunch of stuff. We also do PS Love You XOXO, which is the show you're listening to now. If you don't know what that show is, wow, I don't know how you made this podcast. It's wild. And then what else? We do.
I got it. I think I got it.
It's a great YouTube channel. You should subscribe. YouTube.com/kindafunnygames.
No, I didn't. I don't know. I must have dreamed this question. Somebody wrote in with a question.
I saw it. I remember reading it.
Right, where he was talking about him coming into the thing. Oh, there was one question that. No.
I mean, I'm in control effing it.
It's no longer in there, I don't think, but I do remember.
There's this one that's like, if you look at on the document between pages 4 and 5, there's a question that's all effed up there, and it's like all truncated and screwed up, and I don't know what that was supposed to be.
Deleted it.
I don't know.
Oh wait, looks like it's. Hold on. What if I highlight this? Okay, no, that doesn't work the way I thought it was. Because part of my theory was maybe all the text turned to white. But that's not it. That's not it.
Theory.
Yeah, well, it's gone. We're gonna talk about Tommy showing up at the house. I forget what the question was though.
Yes, the question was something like, how did you feel about Tommy showing up in the house? And also, sorry to whatever reader sent this in, that we don't have that cited yet offhand. But how'd you guys feel about Tommy showing up to the house? Did you feel like it was him trying to get Ellie to find resolution to her PTSD, or was this a selfish pursuit in him messing up her life when she already decided to move on?
Damn, Janet with the photographic memory. I love it.
Right?
This is why I picked it. I thought it was a good one. Like, because I thought for me it was literally what we're talking about with Ellie in Future Days. Again, this song that applies to everything, right? Where Tommy is the one who shows up at the beginning of the game and is telling Ellie, let's not do this, right? And Ellie goads him into doing it. Then they all go on this horrible adventure. They come back, and Tommy now has lost his wife because he just fucking violated her trust yet again to go off on his little crusade here, even though she asked him not to, right? And he stole horses or whatever and to do it. Like, she dumps his ass, leaving him with nothing. So now all he has is this revenge that he is still seeking, and he can't do it anymore because of the wounds inflicted on him by Abby. It's like, it's, as we keep talking about, just this cycle, right? And like people not learning the lesson in the moment of like, fucking stop. Like, you can let this go when they can't let their hate go.
Yeah, I was thrown by. Wait, go ahead, Blessing.
I was just saying, I'm with that too, and I think I didn't necessarily see it as much as him going to Ellie's house to be like, all right, Ellie, let's fucking ruin your life some more. I definitely did see it as Tommy going through the same issues that Ellie was going through in that moment, right? Like, Tommy was probably seeing the same flashbacks to Joel because Tommy was there, right? I guess Tommy didn't. Tommy didn't see Joel get killed because Tommy was knocked the fuck out because of that rock that hit his head. But you imagine that, like, that leaves a scar on him as somebody who was brothers with Joel and knew Joel way longer than even Ellie knew Joel. And so yeah, I think that was him kind of going through the same things that Ellie was, but also not being able to carry it out physically because at this point he's kind of broken physically and can't chase after Abby himself. So that's just how I see it.
I really hated Tommy so much when he showed up to this house with his bullshit. I was really upset. But so when I read this question at first, I thought, oh yeah, like, fuck Tommy. He's an asshole. He just came by. It's easy to say, let's go do this when you can't even come with me anymore. You want me to go off and do this on my own. There's obviously he can't provide that physical support anymore, but like, he has nothing to offer you other than guilt and kind of basically negging you into going on this revenge mission. But when I thought about it more, I'm like, well, if Tommy is trash, this is just a reminder that Ellie was also trash, because Ellie did the same thing to Tommy at the beginning of the game.
Yeah.
She basically challenges his love and dedication to Joel, which is one of the most reprehensible things I think you can do to someone who lost anyone. And, obviously Ellie was grieving, blah, blah, blah. We get it. But I think also we have to accept the fact that everyone deals with their stuff emotionally, psychologically, if trauma happens. But at the end of the day, like, you need to be a good person or try. And I think the problem is, like, yeah, we can make excuses for why Ellie and Tommy are doing this. But the point is they both did something kind of horrible. They both, like, tried to guilt the other person into going on a quest that they didn't want to go on. And they both got their way. which is just like, honestly, they deserve each other. Like, I was really mad at Tommy, but who's to say that like Ellie didn't do the same thing at the beginning? That Ellie didn't also throw a wrench in his relationship as well, even though we all know they probably split up for other reasons and always had a rough relationship. But hey, I'm not Tommy's wife, so you got to ask her what was up with that.
Yeah, Maria, what was up with that?
Yeah, what was going on? Shouts to Maria for like landing those horses, though. She was cool.
Yeah,
but
that was a cool scene.
I also think like so much of this game, and I feel like it's very reflective of real life, because how often are we transparent with our feelings to ourselves or with other people? Is people going through stuff in isolation despite having people there for them? How much is Ellie really telling Dina versus what she writes in her journal, right? And obviously, I'm not saying you have to share all your private thoughts with the people around you, because that's why they're private thoughts. But, you know, I love that scene where Dina kind of mentions, like, you think I'm not going through this too? You think you're the only one suffering? And yeah, it's just, they both suck. They both deserved what happened to them. I'm just like a horrible person, but I think they both did the same thing. So I can't be mad at Tommy and not mad at Ellie.
God damn it, Blessing. God damn it, Blessing. Janet's making this like totally crucial, amazing point. Blessing sends this fucking meme through on assets that's about Tommy and Abby. I'm fucking losing. Kevin, can you show it? Can you show what you just sent there?
Oh, man.
You know what? I used to teach high school, so I'm used to it. I can handle it.
No, I know. Yeah, I didn't mean it like that. Yeah, it's just God damn it, Blessing.
Oh, okay, wait. Oh my god, that's really accurate. That is the whole game.
If you're an audience, yeah. Corey Cudney put up a meme over here, and it's every time Abby sees Tommy, like, and it's who's this from SpongeBob?
Just a random character from SpongeBob.
Just some fish. Like, how many times do we have to teach you this lesson, old man?
That's so accurate.
It's so good. It's so good.
And it's both of them. Both Ellie and Tommy like can't stay away from this quest.
Yeah, no, totally. And that's what is obviously so heartbreaking about it. And again, like one of those reasons that, like, you know, it's like I like horror movies, and I know so many people don't like horror movies, and it's why would you put yourself through that? Like I can see those being a parallel feeling to this of like, I'm playing this game that I don't like why they're doing what they're doing, but I can't not do it. I need to see them through it. Cause again, I guess it's because they're so well-rounded, and I do love the characters so much that I feel for them and what the positions they're in. So I want to see them play it out, but like they keep making the wrong choices and there's no way to tell them that. As when I've learned personally, when I'm making the wrong choices, there's usually not a way to tell me that, right? Like especially when they're fueled by emotions, whether it be a relationship or a breakup or whatever you want to call it. Let's get one in here. I like this one from Kyle. Kyle writes in and says, "Is religious tolerance a theme of The Last of Us Part 2?" Now, that might seem like an odd question when one of the enemy factions is a cult of religious extremists, but hear me out. First, there's the synagogue, where the Jewish faith was given some love, as Dina comments on how she likes being from a long line of survivors, is glad that the Torah was left alone and safe, and that Ellie journals about faith. And then Ellie journals about faith. But the primary place I see the theme of religious tolerance is Abby's relationship with Lev. As they spend time together, going to get medical supplies for Yara, Lev offers glimpses at his faith. Abby wants to reduce it down, but Lev asks her if she's ever read the prophet's writings and indicates that he believes the violence and his own expulsion from the group is not what the prophet would have desired. For me, this mirrors so strongly what we see in today's world, with so many LGBTQ plus individuals continuing to proclaim and practice their faith despite the pain and suffering individuals from within that faith community have caused. Their faith is defined not by what humanity does, but by what they believe to be true about the divine. What do you all think? Thank you for all the time and killing it on The Last of Us content, Kyle. I would argue that, yes, it is, but it's because the game overall is about tolerance and understanding. I think it applies to every aspect of it. I think, and granted, again, 37-year-old white guy, so I can't speak to everything, but like, I think that, yeah, religious tolerance is handed here well. I think the conversation you're referencing with Abby and Lev is such an interesting look at it, where it is like, yeah, well, you're the people that are killing us all the time. And Lev's like, that's not what she's about. Like, have you read the thing? Like, she's about love. She would hate all this stuff. And then in this tolerance in general and understanding in general, I think the fact that Lev is trans in the way that's presented in a way that I missed completely when he asks her, like, did you hear what they were calling me? And she's like, yeah, do you want to talk about it? And he's like, no. Like, I missed originally it, and then eventually I think I was talking to somebody, they explained, and then obviously it's explained later on when you're with Yara. It was like, oh man, what a great way to introduce this thing. And also, at least not for me, I was already luckily, I'm down with trans people, I'm fine with that. But to have it explained in a way that I think is so is in this extreme instance of like, oh, this crazy cult doesn't even want him because he isn't going to do this and be like, it's such a thing of like, well, no, that would suck. Why wouldn't they let him be the person he wants to be? And it's like, oh, right. Why would anyone not let someone be the person they want to be if they're not hurting other people? Like, I think the whole game is about tolerance.
Yeah, and I think to the Torah stuff with Dina, I think the way I read that, I read that scene specifically was them kind of introducing humanity back into this post-apocalyptic story. Like, so much of The Last of Us is about connections and interpersonal relationships, and so much of it is them injecting humanity into a time where nothing feels human. And so I saw the Torah scene in the same way I saw the Ellie and Dina smoking weed when they found the stash scene, right? Like, these are ways for us to kind of be able to connect to these characters in ways that seeing them kill each other isn't really a great way for us to, like, connect with Ellie or connect with Dina. Dina having this history, and Dina having this identity, right? Her being Jewish, her being able to be represented by that, and talk to Ellie about that as a unique characteristic of her. I kind of saw that as that. But yeah, in terms of the tolerance stuff, to what Greg is saying too, like, I think there's so many different aspects of multiple characters that are brought to the forefront in order to allow their characters to appear colorful in ways that I think work so well, right? Like Dina being Jewish and bi, Ellie being gay, who am I missing? Oh yeah, Lev being trans and also part of this group, right? Like there is so much in the game that regards identity and who people are at their core. And I really like Natalie Flores' review where she talks about for Pace Magazine, where she talks about Last of Us Part 2 being a game about love, because I think that is a good summation of it, as a game that we talk a lot about revenge, we talk about a lot of hate, we talk a lot about those things that I think appear on the surface and those things that exist thematically and those things that the game kind of hammers on. But so many of the actions, if not all the actions of the in the game, stem from some sort of love. And that exists throughout the different identities that the characters have, that exists throughout the different sexualities that the characters have, the different ways that they identify with their gender, different ways they identify religiously. All that stuff exists throughout in a way that I honestly think that Abby saying "You are my people" is the most powerful line in the game because of all that, because of how that summates the whole game in that way, that in a game that is all about revenge and hate, Abby saying "You are my people" is that thing that kind of prevails. And that is when we talked about earlier, right? Like the characters actually learning about this cycle of revenge that they're on and trying to break it, right? Like, at no point did I feel like they actively sat down and were like, oh yeah, revenge is bad. But I do think like within those moments, Abby saying "You are my people" was kind of this prevailing moment of pretty much that, but not in a way that is written down in a textbook or necessarily learned. It's more so in a way that is felt, and that's why I think it works so well.
I don't think there's enough evidence to support religious tolerance being a theme in The Last of Us, or rather like a motif, if you want to get technical, which I love to get technical because I used to teach high school English. So it is, you have one, this was it Kyle, right, who wrote in with us. They present one piece of supporting evidence, which is the situation with Lev. I feel like Dina's discussion of her Jewish faith, isn't it? Well, I guess maybe it could be an example of religious tolerance, but I feel like more so what the game's getting at in terms of religion is that we all have different kinds of faith, and faith presents itself in different ways, and some of those ways can be bad and some of them can be good. So we have the example of this extremist cult that is transphobic, among probably other things, but that's at least one confirmed issue with that. Then we have Dina, where she's Jewish, but she acknowledges that she doesn't really pray, and she doesn't seem like she, compared to her sister, is as religious as her sister is in terms of the practice. But Ellie asked, "Well, do you pray?" And she says, "Yeah, I do sometimes. Like when Joel died, when we left." Like, she kind of points to these key moments where in times of darkness, that's her light, and that's a big thread that we see through the existence of fireflies. We see Yara say the prayer at the statue when they're on the island, and then after she does that and kind of acknowledges that, before moving forward, Abby mentions, look to the light or whatever. And it's something my dad used to say. And there are these, and for Ellie, I think her playing that song is her form of prayer. It's her connection to Joel and this experience, this relationship, and it's meditative and painful and healing. Like, we never see her ever finish that song, maybe because it's too painful for her to do, and by the end it literally is painful to do because she is severely injured. But she kind of plays it in sort of this secretive personal thing. Dina says, "What is that?" And she says, "Oh, it's nothing." "Oh, it doesn't sound like nothing to me." And then she plays "Take on Me," which was random but interesting. I think that is more so what the game is saying in terms of faith and religion. I think there's a layer of religious tolerance, but to me the main religious motif would be faith appears in different ways and has, causes us to behave in different ways. We are interact with faith differently.
Let's read a question that's piggybacking off some of the stuff we've been talking about here and made me mad. So maybe I'm misinterpreting it and you'll set me straight. Abdullah wrote it into patreon.com/kindoffunnygames and said, I finished Last of Us Part 2 and I thought it was an incredible game, but with some major flaws in my opinion. The most disturbing thing, though, is that it seems like criticism or praise of this game has to be binary. I felt that many of the deaths did not have the impact that was intended. That some LGBT diversity inclusions were slightly distasteful and didn't serve a purpose in the story. And I didn't appreciate Naughty Dog being clever with hiding Joel's death in their trailers. However, I think there were many brilliant moments. I loved playing with Abby. I thought the gameplay was spectacular, and the Abby-Lev interactions were the closest I felt to the brilliance of the Joel and Ellie relationship. All in all, it was an incredible experience. My question is, why does it feel like having criticism of the game automatically bunches you into a group that are simply against LGBT rights, or people that only watch leaks? I really like this game, but I didn't think it was as good as the first one. I had issues with the game, but it was obviously not a terrible game. What the heck happened to having a nuanced view? It's a weird one because your question doesn't make me angry. I think there is nuanced views, and I think that you can get along with that and all the stuff. And I think that, yes, like, not liking it can, if you're going to say you hated this game, you're not saying anything crazy here, Abdullah, in terms of what you think of the game and what you liked or didn't like. There are still nuanced reviews and things going on. What I don't like is that some LGBT diversity inclusions were slightly distasteful and didn't serve a purpose in the story. I don't understand that part. Does anybody understand that part?
I wish there was more context for that, because I can't tell if they're saying that, like, I can't tell if they're saying, okay, so why was Dina bi? Why is Lev trans, right? Because, like, those characters can exist in the story and it doesn't necessarily have to serve like a greater meaning, right? Like,
that is 100% the point.
Like, we have white characters in stories all the time. We don't have to, like, explain why they're there, right? Like, people coexist. There's different types of people. There's nothing wrong with that.
And that's what put me off, is that, it didn't serve a purpose to the story. My sexuality doesn't serve a purpose to my story right now in me hanging out with Blessing or whatever. You know what I mean? Like, I don't understand that. This is the fact that if you're sitting there being like, so Ellie and Dina were gay or bi or whatever, and that wasn't a major, they didn't bring that up, and they weren't like, no, like, what, that's normal. People, LGBTQ people are, oh, there goes Blessing's camera finally. He's had enough of this conversation. That's how it is every day. That there, Abdullah, there's probably people that are gay or LGBTQ that you interact with every day that you don't know that they're not serving a purpose to your story, or their sexuality isn't serving a purpose to your story, right? Janet, am I crazy?
Yeah, I mean, I totally echo that as well. I would like to think that maybe they just mean, like, the way it was done, was it good or something? Or maybe they have a more interesting critique. Like, I've spoken to, other queer folks or trans people or just other minority groups that are represented on, like, hey, how do you think they handled this? Because it's a different lens when you're, I can speak to, I mentioned Manny a lot as someone that's also Mexican, on how I thought his portrayal was, and I'll have an automatically different, or I have a quicker connection to bring that up than someone who isn't Mexican, most likely, just because that's who I am.
Yeah.
I mean, but if they just it's not serving, it doesn't need to. None of those, like, who a character is doesn't need to serve a purpose to the story. But then it's also weird because I feel like all of their inclusion very much served a purpose to the story. It wasn't even just like as an aside, like, oh, by the way, Dina's bi. It's like, well, the purpose is she's Ellie's girlfriend, so obviously she's not a straight woman, you know. And so I think, if anything, almost all of those, all of the queer identities that were included had actually a narrative purpose. This is one of the examples where it just doesn't really match up. So
in the spoiler cast with Neil and the team, but Neil in particular, one of the questions I asked was from, I can't remember if they were trans or just they had trans friends, but it was the, not even argument, but the conversation that it was cool to see a trans person represented. Some people in their friend group were put off by the fact that using Lev's dead name was a plot point. And Neil had an answer to it that was like, obviously, that there's, trans people work at Naughty Dog and they talked to a whole bunch of people, and it was part of the story they were trying to go for here in terms of like, and again, I'm 37-year-old white guy. What the fuck do I know? But it was that thing of, I think the fact that they weren't celebrating it, it was being used in a way of like, hey, this is fucked up. And like, do you care? And Abby's like, I don't care. Like, do you want to talk about it? No. All right, cool. Let's move on with our lives, because I'm not this fucking bigoted religious cult or whatever. Like, that's what I took away from it. So it's possible, Abdullah, that I'm just misinterpreting your question overall, but I thought it was interesting that you bring it up twice, right? Where that some LGBT diversity inclusions were slightly distasteful. Go on, blah, blah, blah. So why does it feel like having criticism of this game automatically bunches you into a group that are simply against LGBT rights? Blah, blah, blah. Well, it's like, well, hold on a second. You just, it
like
seems like your question's saying you're one of those people
like,
that you just didn't like that they were
why
included.
Is my homophobic take seen as homophobic? Just asking for a friend, and it's like, I think I really hate when people have, this is kind of a little bit getting away from the question because I don't mean to just pile on, but it reminds me of like, there are certain, whenever something is focused on a group that's not normally represented, be it women, be it queer folks, whatever, people are always like, oh, if I say I don't like it, suddenly I'm like, I hate women or I hate queer people. And no, but why don't you like it? And if it's because they're there, you said it, not me. Like, you display that yourself, that is your issue with it. And I also think too, like, being bigoted or having messed up ideologies, it's not always an obvious thing as well. I think a lot of times people think that, oh, I don't have a problem with it, I just don't know why it's there. It's like, that is a spectrum of being intolerant. Like, oh, you don't mind, but like, does it need to be in here? It's like that's not cool. And I think people need to reflect on that, because it may not be saying, I don't think queer people should be allowed to get married. You may not be on that end of the spectrum, but you're still on the spectrum of intolerance.
Yeah. And yeah, I don't know. There's also like an element of, fuck, I forgot what was going on. I had like, I legit had a point and I was about to make it, and then it totally skipped me. And so
you find more funny
come back
memes
to me.
That
it's the new camera.
You know what I mean?
It is a new camera. It took me so long to set this thing up that it totally just erased my mind as I was going through it.
Don't say that.
Oh,
then, come on.
No, well, I was gonna say, like, there's so much nuanced conversation happening with the game, and so much of it isn't colored that way, right? Like, we brought up Callie's review earlier in this episode, and Callie gave it an 8 out of 10, which is on, I guess, the lower side, even though it's still a great score. As far as critical reviews, it's a little bit on the lower side of what The Last of Us Part 2 is scoring. I don't think I've seen one person say that Callie is like any sort of like transphobic or homophobic or whatever based on her review, right? Like, there's nothing wrong with having nuanced conversation about The Last of Us Part 2 or having critiques with The Last of Us Part 2, because I don't think anybody here would say that Last of Us Part 2 is a perfect game. And even in terms of representation, right? Like, there are, except for Greg Miller, in terms of representation, there are things that we can point to and be like, oh yeah, they could have done this or that better, right? Like, doing on our spoiler cast, I think it was Laura who was the one that was talking about dead naming Lev, and how she took that as a trans person and what that means, and kind of her critiques and views on that, right? And I forget if it was you, Janet, or it might have been Natalie, or actually I think it was you who was talking about Manny and how the portrayal of Manny could have been better in quite a few ways. And I actually brought up Isaac during that same episode that I forgot about, because Isaac is a character who we've not talked about at all in any of our spoiler casts, in any of our reviews, in any of our things, and that's because he is extremely forgettable, and he's also the only like voiced black dude in that game as far as I can recollect. And so for me, Isaac was a character who kind of came and went in a way where I was like, damn it, like they could have done so much better with that character, man. Because as soon as they introduced Isaac, I was all about it. I was all like, man, let's go. This dude's a boss. This dude's about to make a huge impact. And that man had 2 scenes and died in the second one.
The way he died was so anticlimactic. And like I think, Blessing, what you brought up from our drunk cast, because despite it being a drunk cast, there were some good things that came out of that. And it was
the first half really good.
Yeah, at a certain point, I kind of start to waver. But what's funny is I'm the exact same person, just a little bit more obnoxious, which might be too much for some of you if this is already leaning on that edge. But I think our conversation was an excellent example of the ways that, and this is something that all of us need to work on, trying to understand perspectives that aren't our own, because it's easy to know the one that we have because it's our life. So like, obviously I noticed Manny right away. It doesn't surprise me that Laura was the one that had interesting critiques of Lev's portrayal and how that was handled. It makes sense that you would point out Isaac in a way where I'm like, oh shit, I didn't even think of that. And that made me realize that like I need to kind of step my stuff up and be able to look at things from more sociological, critical lenses that are outside of just the perspectives I bring to the table, which granted, I have a good amount of them, but like just, being a woman, etc. But yeah, and that's why it's important to have like different kinds of people from different backgrounds talking about this game and learning it and having that conversation. So yeah, I mean, to bring back to the question, you're allowed to not like Last of Us Part 2, whether it's, if it's from a place of bigotry, that's not cool or valid. And if it's for a place of just bad criticism, like if you're going to dislike this game, like have good reasons for it. Because there are reasons out there. There's a lot of them that I can name even as someone that loves the game. And I don't like bad criticism and I don't like homophobia. So
this is a double negative for you.
If you at me with homophobia or you at me with bad takes, I will block you. Like that is just facts. So
with the Laura Bailey episode of We Have Cool Friends just went live as we're today as we're recording this, but it's just been a blur. And one of the things I thought was interesting in talking her with that is I was doing my normal shit where I'm hypothesizing on like, oh well, how Abby and Owen actually ended up at the WLF, right? And like that there, and she corrected me at one point. She's like, well, there was at one point scenes written that were going to be flashbacks, or maybe, and I might be exaggerating there, but there was definitely a backstory that Jeffrey Wright's character Isaac was Abby's dad's like best friend. And it was very much like a Marlene kind of thing where there was gonna be stuff of Isaac taking care of her and raising her, and then her kind of becoming that super soldier for WLF, like to make him happy, plus avenge her father and stuff. And I thought that would have gone a long way, because I'm there with you when you think about it. Of like, I remember when we meet Isaac and he comes out of the torture room and talks to us, and it was that thing of like, all right, fuck, dude, they've been hyping him for a while. We're gonna see a lot more of hhim. And then you see him on the island, he gets shot by Yara. You're like, okay, cool, that's interesting how they did that.
Rest in peace.
Rest in peace, indeed. I want to give you one more question, then one more review, and then we'll get the hell out of here. This is interesting. Elliot writes into patreon.com/kindoffunnygames and says, the only plot hole I noticed in part 2 was that a gang of old fireflies deeply connected to the site looking for a cure seemed to care less about Ellie. I know we hear in a recording that, quote, she is the only person who could have found the cure. I'm sorry, I fucked that all up. I know we hear in a recording that the, quote, only person who could have found a cure was Abby's father, but he seems like a guy who would have taken notes. Everyone else does. In this world and to these people, Ellie would at least be as infamous as the legend Joel. Did you find it strange in your playthroughs? If not, what reason do you give for the Fireflies' sudden disinterest in Ellie and the possibility of a cure?
I don't know. I found the reason they gave to be good. Like the idea that the doctor was the only guy who could have gotten the cure out of Ellie. Once he's dead, then all hope is gone. That's the way I took it, and that's the way that like that justified it to me. Once I heard that, I was like, all right, cool, I get it.
Yeah, I feel like I didn't think about this until I read this question, and I'm like, yep, there are a lot of notes, and none of them were instructions on how to like cut some part of someone's brain out. Probably would have been useful to write down, but yeah, it just seemed a little bit odd that I guess there weren't enough, like, I don't know, I'm trying to sort of justify it now on like reverse engineer this, but I guess like because Joel killed like everybody, like he like decimated everyone. So I guess there just wasn't really enough left, and like the Fireflies were like slowly rebuilding, but I imagine that they didn't rebuild enough to want to go after Ellie. And I also imagine that the people that are now in the Fireflies might not be, obviously we know some of those members are the same because when Abby calls in from Santa Barbara, they know what,
Her dad
post
is.
she was set
Yeah,
at and who her dad is. But, who's to say that those people are against, they might be against what happened with the original Fireflies, where they basically were like, we're gonna crack Ellie's skull open regardless, to be honest. They were just ready to go. They didn't care about what she thought, or no one cared about what Ellie thought at the end of that game, which is really sad. But yeah, I guess that's how I kind of imagine it, that there are not enough numbers, that maybe they don't have the passion of like trying to go and essentially kidnap this who's now a woman and just murder her to like cut out her brain, which they don't really even know how to do. Like it kind of makes sense, but it is a little surprising that there isn't more of a thought of like who Ellie is.
Yeah.
And it's just all focused on Joel.
I find Elliot's word choices interesting, right? Where he says that, Ellie is as infamous, right, as Joel, which I don't agree with, right? She'd be at least as infamous as the legend as Joel. Like, well, no, right? Joel killed all these people. They understood that it was a girl that he was stealing away that was, already in pre-op or whatever, in surgery, actually. So, I mean, like, I don't find it that they'd be mad at her about it. And I also, I think everybody who comes from the WLF is so broken at that point, because the WLF is not searching for this. They are not looking for the cure. They are there to fucking take over Seattle and get rid of the scar. Like, they're not in this for the all hope of humanity kind of thing. I think that they came there as heartbroken kids, and I don't think that, and that's the other thing too, is how young they are, that even if they had the notes, would they understand? Does the WLF, I mean, like, yeah, you can make the argument, I guess, that, Nora's working in the medical field. Mel is a surgeon, right? That her dad was her dad's best student or whatever, but they've given up on that idea. And I don't, it is an interesting take on why. I just assume because, yeah, he's the guy who could do that and he's dead. And so how are we going to do it? We're a bunch of, kids who are down in our luck are now running with this WLF group that doesn't have that desire to it. And it's also the interesting thing of do they know that Ellie is Ellie? Because Nora's surprised, right, when she drops down there and doesn't need the mask.
They don't know.
None of them really got it. Even when Ellie told Abby in the theater that Joel did what he did to save me, Abby didn't really have any sort of reaction, which I thought was very interesting.
Yeah, and so that's the thing about it, where I think it's more interesting, this thing I've seen people kick around and talk to me about, of like, cool, now Abby and Lev show up at whatever island is escaping me right now, the new island. Catalina, thank you. And they tell the Fireflies their story, and they're like, oh yeah, we're from there, and we chased that, and we killed the guy who killed we ran into the girl. So what, she's like, wait, what, was she still alive? And like, do they have, like, does that Firefly group want to go and have that? Like, that would be, I think, an interesting, again, I don't know if I need a whole 30-hour game of it, but an interesting future possibility of playing as the Fireflies, and you are marching out there trying to find Ellie, and not to kill her, like she's going to think you are, right? But you're actually marching out there to try to make this all work and try to synthesize a cure from her. But who knows? And then, final review before we close out this show. Abigail Warner wrote into patreon.com/kindoffunnygames and says, The Last of Us Part 2 is a special game, and there's no denying that. At the same time, it is a very hard game to fully enjoy, but that's kind of the point. I have never played a game that made me have as strong feelings as I did in this game. There were parts of this game where I truly felt sick to my stomach and had to take a break. A visceral reaction like that can only come from great storytelling. This game made me have the conflicted feelings of not wanting to do what had to be done that the first game gave so many people. I was someone who agreed with Joel's decision to save Ellie in the first game. I knew it wasn't the right thing to do, but in his shoes, I wouldn't have been able to let them kill Ellie. I didn't want to kill the doctor, but my desire to save Ellie was stronger, so the decision didn't affect me that much. In part 2, playing from both perspectives was amazing and provided so much context that it was so incredibly hard to fight Ellie as Abby and vice versa. I did not want to do those fights, and they caused a lot of anxiety. Those fights made me feel sick. I really struggled with my feelings of this game initially, but as I've gotten farther away from beating the game and have given myself time to process my thoughts, I've begun to feel more positively. This game is so special because it really sticks with you and challenges you to really think. Not only is this an awesome sequel, but it also enhances the original game as well. Regardless of how you feel about the story, I think we can all agree that the acting and animations are incredible. Naughty Dog did an amazing job, and this will certainly be a game that we will talk about for years to come. Sorry if this is a little long, but I haven't had anyone to discuss this game with, and I was so ready to get my thoughts out. Thank you for the 2 amazing spoiler casts, Adeoye Jr. Well, Abs, don't worry about it. That's what we're here for, and I think you say a lot of stuff that I feel as well.
Yeah, I think the fact that toward the end of that game where you're playing as Ellie and you're fighting Abby, and you get to the moments where you have to tap square so you can like shove the knife into Abby. The fact that getting to those points, I very much, and I've said this before a billion times, but it was very affecting on me. The fact that at those points, I very much did not want to tap square, to the point where I died multiple times during those fights because I wanted Abby to win. I wanted Abby to get out there alive. Yeah. I think that is like one of the most powerful things I'm going to have experienced in a game this year, let alone probably this generation. And I think, you know, that's a testament to what they're doing with this game and how good this game is. Like, yeah. It's really good.
Janet, any closing thoughts on Last of Us Part 2?
Really well said. I'm glad that Abigail wrote this in. I love hearing people's thoughts. I do think this is a game because it's so drama filled. Like, whether or not you think the story is even good, like the drama, like I live for the drama of it. It's so fun to talk about and just enjoy, even on a surface level, even without digging into the nuances and the themes and the symbols and all that. So yeah, it's definitely a game that, like, what I love about being able to come on like this show and just make general content is there's so many players who, if you are like really hardcore and you're like, I'm going to get it, I'm going to marathon through it because I want to like have it done and I don't want to worry about spoilers. It can be very lonely when you get out that other end and you're like, none of my friends have played it. Or maybe you just don't have, you know, a community like that that's going to be playing that quickly. And to be able to be that friend for a second, even if I don't reply to every single comment or every tweet I get, I love being able to do that. So like, I appreciate this person writing in. And then I also just want to say, because I can't talk about it enough, shout out to that museum scene, best scene in the game, Tears. God. And shout out to the Rat King, horrifying. Oh, God. There was a question in here about the Rat King, but I don't remember what it was. But like, shout out to the Rat King. It did not go unnoticed. We need to talk about the Rat King more. The end.
What's the Rat King? What? I don't understand this reference.
It's the Resident Evil, like.
Yeah. My apologies.
I love what me and Blessing both just did differently. Yeah. You know, right?
You know, this guy.
There's a gift for Corey.
Yeah, like it. That was such a horrifying time, and like I love that this game has so many moments where I don't want to die, not because, well, one, I don't want to do it again because I'm busy trying to beat the game, but two, like I just feel like I don't want to mess up the flow of the game. And I felt so much horror and dread and panic racing through, going through all the crevices, picking up ammo, shooting, and then when it broke off, it was so frenzied and horrifying. And I'm a punk when it comes to boss battles. I kind of hate boss battles because it's like a test I didn't study for. And when I saw the Rat King, I was like, don't make me fight it. Don't make me fight it. Please. No, they're not going to do it. They're not. And then they're like, when you saw that you were fighting it, I was like, fuck. And then it was just such a wonderful introduction into it. I love The Last of Us has always done very few boss battles or boss moments, but whenever they do it, it's so impactful and so meaningful and ties in so well with the story and the gameplay. Rat King forever.
Rat King forever. Ladies and gentlemen, this has been a very special episode of PS I Love You XOXO, but we couldn't let you go without seeing this week's PSN profile of the week. Remember, you can write into patreon.com/kindoffunnygames, giving us your story and your PSN profile so we can look at it and judge your trophies. Today, Mojo Mason writes into patreon.com/kindoffunnygames and says, "Hey, Greg, my friend and longtime Greg Miller fanboy Nick Carr has a birthday coming up. I would love to surprise him by asking you to delve into his trophy list. He has spent a lot of time grinding out trophies and takes great pride in them. Being that you are one of his favorite people in the industry and he listens to every episode, I'm sure this will make his day. Thanks so much for all you do, Mojo Mason." We are now looking then, ladies and gentlemen, at Greg Miller fanboy Nick Carr's trophy. His PSN profile is Roly Poly Yoni, ROLLIEPOLLIEYONI. His description says, "Jonah is my favorite, Jeff is a cutie." So that's what's going on with Roly Poly Yoni. Level 29 in trophies, about 6,500 trophies, and then 81 platinums. Nothing to shake a stick at, including a man after my own heart here, Minecraft Dungeons, his latest platinum, one I am working on, but have been sidetracked by reviews. And then right behind it, The Last of Us Part 2. A very, very, very good platinum. I can't say enough. how happy I was to see Naughty Dog respond to having one of the worst platinums I've ever seen with The Last of Us Part 1, and then coming out and crushing it with Last of Us Part 2. Of course, use Janet's guide for it, kindafunny.com/IGN TLU2 when you want to go. But also Life is Strange, Tekken 7, Batman, Enemy Within. These are all platinums. Right now, working on Minecraft, it looks like up here. Shell Shock Live, which I don't know what that is.
I gotta give a shout out to Overwatch. They have the Overwatch Platinum, and that Platinum is no joke. You legit have to use every hero in that game and do like essentially like an expert maneuver with each of those heroes in order to get that.
Well, that's the thing. If you look at,
of
course, we use PSN profiles to look at everybody's profiles. Under rarest trophies here, it has Focused as the most rare trophy in the collection, which is a 1.68% of players have reported. Focused is earn 2 killing blows with a single use of Echo's focusing beam in quicker competitive play. I have no idea what that means, but that's a rare
Echo
one,
is a DLC hero. That was the latest hero that was actually added, and so the fact that they already have this trophy is very impressive.
And then right behind that is the Overwatch Platinum, at a 1.87. So that's pretty gosh darn good there. And then Hitman Go, Overwatch, Concrete Genie, Persona 4 Dancing All Night, hell yeah, Rocket League. Only 14 of 46 trophies in Predator Hunting Grounds. Not a fan of that. So you got to get cracking.
Unfortunate.
On that. That's the big one, Nick Carr. But Resident Evil 3, Snaky Bus. I love it. You love to see it. You're getting some of the Garbo Platinums. That's what it's all about. Remember? Awesome. Human Fall Flat, Trevor Saves the Universe, Goat Simulator, Nick Carr. You're a man after my own heart.
Nickelodeon kart racers.
Exactly.
Jack 2's on there, so shout out to Jack 2, favorite game ever.
Happy birthday, Nick Carr. And ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for watching this episode of PS I Love You XOXO. Remember, we put up a new one each and every Tuesday. You can get it early on patreon.com/kindafunnygames. Watch it live as we recorded. Get it ad-free. Get it with the post-show we're about to do. But if you have no bucks tossed our way, no big deal. Subscribe to youtube.com/kindafunnygames. You can get it there or podcast services around the globe each and every Tuesday. Janet, I can't thank you enough for coming in. I was late because of a stupid GameSpot stream. Typical, you know what I mean? Not running as nice as IGN. Where can people keep up with you?
You can follow me on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, all social media platforms at GameOnysus. That's Game ONYSUS.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your time, Janet.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Ladies and gentlemen, we got a post show to do, but until next time, it's been our pleasure to serve you.